Render. "You're all right," she said. "Just all right?" She snuggled in closer and rested her head against his shoulder. The wind through the half-open window of the van stirred her wispy blonde hair against his chin and neck, but he didn't complain. "Just right," she whispered into his skin. Sweat coated both their bodies, drying to a salty sheen, half ocean, half stolen time in a bed in the back of the van. One of her hands moved across his body. He didn't look down to see what she was doing. It was a familiar route. She was tracing the contours of his scars. There were plenty of them. A long thin white line from a knife, stark against his suntanned torso. 2 pucker wounds in his left shoulder, like tiny volcano humps. If he rolled over, she could trace whip marks, and belt marks, like miniature ridges that lined the corded muscle. She had asked once. When he didn't answer, she accepted the silence as answer enough and let it go. It was one of the things he liked about her. Liked, Brill thought and sniffed. "What?" she asked in a sleepy voice. "Nothing." He tightened his arm and curled her closer to him. "Just, happy. You sound surprised, man." Her accent was English, though she hadn't been home in more than 5 years. He almost shrugged, but didn't want to disturb the way she was on him. "I guess I am," he confessed. "I didn't see myself here." "With me?" "With you," he said. "Living here. Living like this." She balled up her fist and gave him a light punch in his tight abdomen. "I like this life," she said. "I do too," Brill answered. "You sound surprised again." He took a deep breath. The air made his lungs expand, raising her head level with his lips. He tilted forward and planted a kiss on top of her hair. He stumbled out of the thick jungle 6 weeks ago onto a narrow 3-lane highway that cut along the African coastline. It was an out-of-the-way place, and 50 kilometers from the rainforest ravine that was the perfect spot for an ambush. Which is what happened. He survived. The others did not. He slipped up the angled ditch and stood on the side of the asphalt, the afternoon sun dripping toward the west, and waited. Waited for the bullet to rip through the foliage and take him out, like it did the rest of his squad. Waited for something to happen. Change came in the form of a square box van with a 4-cylinder engine complaining about the steep grade. Strands of long sun-bleached hair escaped from a loose ponytail and fluttered around cheap metal aviator shades as she pulled up next to him. The glasses gave him an up-down and she smiled. "You're supposed to stick your thumb out, mate." Brill held up his arm and stuck out his thumb. She nodded her head for him to climb in the passenger seat, and when she asked where he wanted to go, he just said away. Her name was Glory, and she took him to a beach. He watched her surf for 3 hours, and took the warm beer she offered from a faded cooler. She gave him a blanket to curl up with in a folding chair outside of the van she called home, while she slept inside behind locked doors. "I'm hungry," said Glory. It was his turn to check the lines. She had a good system and he learned it fast. Wake up before the sun and throw fishing lines into the surf to catch breakfast. Scrounge up a small fire for fish burritos seasoned with lime or lemon. Check the waves for the perfect set and hit the water for a few hours while the lines caught lunch. Chill and work through the noonday sun. Glory was a traveling journalist photographer, who wrote from the back of van she lived in. Fish for dinner and a star-filled sky for company next to driftwood fire. They had moved 12 times in 8 weeks, following a pattern in the water he couldn't recognize. She knew the signs. There was a storm in the mid-Atlantic shooting surf 5,000 miles away to crash up on the South African coast, and she chased the waves. There were stops at roadside stores to replenish meager stores of spice, and citrus fruit and cases of beer. She called in stories and sent mailed packages of photo canisters to an editor in the States. "My turn to cook." Glory began the process of untangling their twisted legs. "I've got it." Brill tilted her head toward him and pressed his lips to hers. He slid open the van door and stepped onto a sandy mat set up like a patio outside. He slipped into the tattered remnants of his BDUs cut into shorts and cinched them over his hips. He tossed a couple of pieces of driftwood onto the coals of the fire and stirred the ashes so they would catch, before he trudged through the sand toward a line in the water a few hundred meters from their camp. 3 long poles were jammed in the sand, propped against sticks to maintain the angle toward the water. 100-pound test line ran across the steady line of white caps that washed up on the shore. Brill grabbed the first line and began to haul it in. The satisfying feel of extra weight on the end was the promise of a good meal. All the fish had trimmed his muscular form even further, burning away any vestige of fat and making his skin thin. The lines and striations of each muscle flexed and rippled under the sun as he coiled the thin line in a neat loop on the ground next to his foot. He could see the silver flash of the big fish body as he pulled and tried to guess what it was before he finished. A frogman stood out of the surf 3 meters from him and aimed spear gun at his chest. Brill dropped the line, and took a step back. He heard the pounding footsteps too late, hidden by the steady crash and roar of water. He spun around, and a second man in a wetsuit tackled him toward the water. Rough shells and packed sand scraped a rash across his bare back, the salt water burning as he flipped the diver over his head and rolled on top of him. A third appeared next to him as a wave disappeared and slammed the butt of his weapon across Brill's head. He fell off the diver who tackled him and tried to stand up. Bodies slammed into him again. One jammed a needle into his neck. He heard the automatic hypodermic hiss something into this jugular. Brill! He heard Glory scream before the world went dark and the denizens of the deep dragged him into the ocean. Chapter 2. He woke up in the dark. Cold metal pressed against his skin. He could smell vomit and oil, and dank must. He tried not to move as he assessed his surroundings. There was a hood over his head, used by someone else. He could smell the sour stench of upchuck but didn't have the taste in his mouth. His tongue had the metal copper taste of medicine, whatever they used to incapacitate him, he supposed. His arms were tied behind his back with zip ties. He could feel them cutting into the skin around his wrist. Not too tight. Just enough to keep him from moving, but not enough to do any damage. He lay at an angle, almost on his back, but for the awkward intrusion of his arms behind him. The air felt different, pressurized, and he wondered for a moment about the frogmen. Military divers. They had snuck up on him, and were in and out of the surf in less than 30 seconds. The whole fight lasted less than a minute, he guessed. He still wore his shorts, but there was a scratchy wool blanket over his legs. Thin, but enough to shield him from the cold air. His torso wasn't as lucky. It was exposed to the cold air temperature that felt thick with humidity. The cold was biting after being acclimated to the heat of the jungle and shore for so long. He shivered and tried not to jump as the blanket was shifted up to his neck. "You awake yet?" a gruff voice said next to him. "That stuff we gave you should be wearing off." Brill almost pretended to ignore him, then decided against it. He needed information, and if they were planning to kill him, they could have held him under the water for 3 minutes and let him go. "American," he said, identifying the voice. "I know you are, but what I'm Edge?" the man asked. Was he a mercenary? Did another company hire him to finish the job started in a ravine in the jungle? "Can I sit up?" Two strong hands grabbed him by the shoulder and shifted him up. Brill felt his legs go over the edge of the metal, like a shelf, or cot bolted to a wall. He leaned back. The shelf wasn't big, 18 inches, maybe. The wall was curved behind him. "Hood?" "Not yet, friend," the man answered. Brill nodded even though his captor couldn't see him. "Where are we?" He used "we" on purpose to make the man think they were in this together. A trick Simon taught him. Words were important. So was silence. He could feel movement in the room, the sound of clothing rustling, gear rattling, but couldn't tell what was happening. "Drink," the man said. The bottom of the hood lifted and a straw was stuck in his lips. Brill could see rough calloused freckled skin, thick strong fingers holding a container with a simple plastic straw. He took a sip. Just water. He sucked down 4 greedy mouthfuls before it was pulled away. "Don't want you pissing yourself on the next leg," the man said. The hood cinched down again. Brill saw a flash of silver before it made it all the way down and felt a cold circle press against the flesh of his neck. He heard a pop and hiss again, and strong hands eased him back down on the metal shelf as he passed out again. Render, Chapter 3. He woke up when they landed. The hood was still on his head, but he could feel pants and a shirt on his skin, shoes on his feet. His hands were bound in front of him, this time. The seat was softer, leather. "Wake up, sunshine," the same gruff voice from before yanked the hood off of his head. Brill winced as bright sunlight burned his retinas. It took a moment for everything to come into focus as he felt the plane turn and taxi. The gruff voice belonged to a red-headed man with a 3-week-old beard and a spray for freckles across his weathered face. He wore clean BDUs, but no weapons except for a knife and a baton. Brill glanced down at his own attire. "What party am I dressed for?" He hadn't worn a suit since his high school graduation, and that was years ago. Even when Simon invited him to executive offerings shindigs, he opted for jeans and a blazer over a t-shirt. "A homecoming party," the ginger grinned. "I forgot my tie." "EO file on you says it's a weapon." They knew his EO file. Maybe that was why he was still alive. But an American kidnapping a former American citizen and bringing him home? He wondered what they did to Glory, if anything. He hoped they let her go. They were dragging him into the water to leave her on a beach, so maybe they did. "What did you do to the girl?" Ginger smiled again. "It was annoying as hell. I've got to hand it to you, my man," the redhead kept grinning. "That was some piece of ass. We watched you in the van before you came with us. Couldn't see much. The angle was bad. But I've got it saved to a disk if you want to play it back. Brill almost made the threat. If you hurt her, you're dead. But Simon taught him that if you had to make a threat, you've already determined your opponent is a danger and should be eliminated. It was a shoot first, shoot often policy that saved his life and the lives of the other members of EO many times. Before the ambush in the jungle, there was no chance to shoot first there. Just shoot back. Even then, he was the only one to escape. The only one to get free from the hail of automatic weapons fire that shredded the leaves and chewed up the black African soil around them. Glory rescued him. Not from the actual ambush, but the aftermath. She healed him. "I can see that look in your eyes," the redhead said as the plane jerked to a stop. "I don't like that look, friend. Your girl is fine. We didn't touch her. Just you." Brill took a breath, but kept his gaze on the gruff man across from him. The man held up a hand with 3 fingers in the air. "Scout's honor." Brill tilted his head to one side. Simon told him once that he had shark's eyes. Brill knew what he meant. Dark eyes, almost black, and a way of looking at someone like they were prey. He supposed they were. He trained harder at the EO camp than anyone, trained longer. He wanted an edge and hard work was the only way he knew how to get it. It also taught him something. He was good at it. Not just the training, but what they were training to do. Kill. He was better than most, and since he knew it, there was an air of confidence about him. Even the red-headed man could feel it, though Brill was bound by zip ties and buckled in an airplane seat. The pilot stepped out of the cockpit and folded down the stairs from the side of the plane. He stepped back inside and shut the door. Brill heard it lock. The man grabbed Brill by the upper arm and helped him up from the seat. "What's your name?" Brill asked. "We don't go by names," the man offered. "Everybody's got a call sign." "Top Gun bullshit," Brill said. "You ain't wrong," the man said. "Watch your step." He eased Brill down the steps and led him onto the tarmac toward a waiting black Suburban. "Any advice for the dance?" Brill asked as his captor put a hand on his head and ducked him into the back seat of the SUV. The driver gripped the wheel and didn't turn around, but Brill noted him watching in the rearview mirror. "It's not that kind of party." The man grabbed the seatbelt and leaned across to strap Brill in. "Snug as a bug," he grinned and stepped back. "Thanks. You can call me Bulldog. Don't thank me. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Brill held up the knife he swiped from the man's belt as he leaned over. He slit the zip ties holding him. The driver twisted around and lifted a Glock 19. Brill darted forward, slammed the knife into the driver's eye and caught the Glock as it fell from his twitching hands. He swung around, thumb clicking the safety on the pistol. A hand jammed his wrist and pressed it against the back of the seat as Bulldog pressed the barrel of a .45 into his forehead. "Drop it! Drop it!" the ginger shouted. Brill let the weapon fall into the floorboard. He stared at the white finger against the trigger, waited for it to flex. "Fuck," Bulldog stepped back out of reach, weapon still trained on Brill. "I hate driving." Render, Chapter 4. "Mr. President." "Hey Senator, damn good to see you." The president lifted himself out of the chair behind his desk and moved around to shake the senator's hand. "I'm glad you could make it." "Thank you sir." "Cut the sir crap, you want an iced tea." The senator settled into the couch by the fireplace and looked up at the portrait of John F. Kennedy with his head bowed. It normally hung on a wall in the hall in the East Wing, but the president had his decorator move it into the Oval Office so he could capture comparisons to his young predecessor. "That sounds good, Mr. President." The senator had known the man for a long time, but he respected the office enough to know the honorific was warranted. The president turned back to the desk and picked up the phone. "Can we get a pitcher of iced tea brought in please?" He hung up without waiting for an answer and settled onto the couch across from the senator. He stretched out his long legs and put both hands behind his head, looking confident and relaxed, even though his dark hair had gone gray almost as soon as he took office. A hazard of the job of being the most powerful man on earth at times. "You want to wait or jump right in?" "Let's jump right in," said the senator. "You remember that boy we sent to South Africa?" A frown marred the visage of the president as he massaged up a memory. "Smart something, right? First name was Smart." The senator grinned. The president had a gift for names and never failed to remind them of that talent. "Brilliant," he answered. "Brill Wingfield, that's right. Good old small-town boy. He died in Angola, right?" "That's what we were told." "Is what we were told true?" "No sir." The president sat up and this time massaged his temples. It was a simple off-the-books agreement between the senator and a boy they selected to do some reporting back to them prior to him taking the Oval Office. In the years since, it might have been called insider trading or corporate espionage, The intelligence gathering they tasked him with, but they felt enough removed that it wouldn't come back to bite them in the ass. Especially once he died. He's not dead? A CIA team picked him up this morning. Same name, same fingerprints in our systems, but he's a South African citizen. How is that? The minister we sent him to spy on reported him dead with his daughter when rebels attacked the camp they were in, said the senator. He lied. It seems so. And now we have him? Brill. He was pulled in this morning along with other operators in a sting operation set up by the CIA. Working with terrorists, the president crinkled his brow. It was a low-level threat to us, so you were debriefed on it several months ago. The CIA acted on a tip and closed the net. Is he a joint citizen? He is, the senator nodded. Then bring him home. There was a quick knock on the door and it opened to admit the president's secretary bearing a tray with a pitcher of iced tea and 2 glasses. The president hopped up and took the tray from her. I'll get this, thank you, he said to her and placed the tray on the coffee table between the couches. He poured a glass for Shelby and another for himself. They both took their time taking the first sip. Damn, that's good iced tea, said the senator. I have the water flown in from home. The president smacked his lips. Seems like it might be a waste till you taste it. Nothing like our water, Shelby agreed. He set his glass down on a coaster. So we render him Mr. President and bring him in for questioning. I spent some time worrying about that boy, said the president. I'd like to find out what he's been up to. Render, Chapter 5. Brill sat in the passenger seat, hands on his lap under the seatbelt. Bulldog drove with one hand, the other across his leg with his weapon aimed at Brill. It wouldn't have bothered him, except that Bulldog did indeed hate driving and he kept his finger on the trigger. Screw you, you sack of shit. Bulldog screamed at another driver. He can't hear you, Brill said. Oh, he knows, Bulldog snapped. You do know, don't you, you son of a bitch? Brill had the feeling he wanted to lay on the horn, but didn't dare take the weapon off him. Not that he could blame the man. The seat between them was still slick with blood from the driver. Bulldog had jerked him out of the driver's seat and made Brill fold the body into the back of the SUV. It got his black suit dark with blood, and Brill almost had a shot at grabbing the knife again. Bulldog stopped him and left the blade buried in the dead man's head. He followed Brill to the front passenger seat and finagled his hands under the belt instead of leaning across him again. The gun never wavered. How far? Too far by fucking much, Bulldog muttered. His eyes studied the road around them, cars whizzing around the black SUV, like flies around a corpse. There, Bulldog shouted in triumph. He cranked the wheel and slammed on the brakes to hang a right turn. The back end got away from him and began to slide, as horns blared and tires squealed. Bulldog fought the giant vehicle under control and straightened out on a long narrow road that cut across a field toward an area of forest. Brill let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. You really suck at driving. Bulldog snorted out a laugh. Fucking drop me in the middle of a war zone and I'm aces. Put me behind the wheel and I'm a wreck. He took a hand off the wheel and tried to wipe sweat off his brow. The truck meandered toward a ditch on one side of the road. Bulldog almost planted it on the other side with his overcorrection. Use both hands, said Brill. Better control. Fuck that, said Bulldog. I'm not taking any chances with you. Brill held 3 fingers up against his leg and tapped them until the man driving looked at them. I won't try anything in the car, he said. Scout's honor. Bulldog laughed. You weren't a fucking Boy Scout. And you were? I'm from New York City. We don't drive and the only scouts in my neighborhood were lookouts for drug dealers. I was a Boy Scout, said Brill. Half a year in elementary school. Guess that wasn't in the file. Bulldog pulled the pistol back and rested it on his lap. He clicked the safety on and moved the other hand up to the wheel. Brill could see the tension in his shoulders melt down as he relaxed a little. Maybe he couldn't control the big truck better with 2 hands, but it felt like he could and that helped. It's not far, said Bulldog. What else was in the file? Enough. I should have fucking known not to lean over you like that. You only did it once. Lesson learned. They teach you that? Brill shrugged. That. A few more besides. I told them transporting you was a 3-man job. They listened on the grab. We even had a 3-man backup team on the road in case you pulled a rabbit. Smart. You think? We got you good enough. He glanced across the seat toward the man. That because you were in the afterglow of some sex shit. Something like that, Brill said. I usually get a feeling when I'm being watched. Satellite uplink. Bulldog pointed toward the sky and grabbed the wheel again fast. Technology is fucking amazing. Brill nodded. I thought I was off-grid enough. You would have been, said Bulldog. Someone saw your picture in a magazine. Brill glanced at him. Background shit, but it triggered and the search got started. It's hard as hell to hide now. Gonna get harder to hide in the future. No use fighting it. Brill filed that intel away. Glory must have snapped him without him knowing, and it made its way back to the US. That's where they were, he knew. Somewhere in the south. He could tell by the pine trees, and the land. The road markers back on the highway weren't helpful. He never memorized highways on rural maps, but he put that on a mental to-do list. The road reached the edge of the pine forest, and Brill saw a fence set back from the trees by 10 yards, wide enough for a Humvee track if the ruts in the ground were any indication. They drove through the trees for 500 meters to a clearing with a second fence. A guard shack stood to one side, with an armed MP waiting next to a fold-down gate. Bulldog pulled up to the man with an M16 rifle held ready. "You son of a bitch," the guard grinned. "What the hell are you doing back here?" "Delivery," Bulldog nodded to Brill. "Yeah," the guard bent down and glanced over. "We've been expecting him. Where's the driver?" "Killed him." "No shit? You were him?" "Him," said Bulldog. "I had no reason." The guard nodded and couldn't help keep the impressed look off his face. "I'll call ahead and get someone to clean the truck, get you a new one. Unless you're staying?" "Hell no," said Bulldog. "I've got another assignment. Can you get me a driver? You want to kill another one? You know I hate fucking driving." The guard nodded and waved them through as he lifted the barrier. Bulldog drove another mile down a winding road. Brill could see paths in the woods in the large compound where the road ended. He counted a dozen buildings, a shooting range, a helipad and small narrow runway next to a giant warehouse. He wondered why they didn't land the plane there, but kept his mouth closed. Bulldog pulled to a halt in front of the largest building. He killed the engine and grabbed the pistol again. "Welcome to hell," he said. "Get out." Render, Chapter 6. The large building was a simple rectangle mounted on top of blocks. There were 4 wooden steps leading up to a wooden porch that ran the front of the building and the length along one side. There was one door painted red in the center of the front with a bulb mounted exactly in the middle of the frame above the door. 2 windows dotted each side, with 4 more along the edge with the porch. Bulldog pulled to the front of the building. Tires crunched the pea gravel drive as he slowed to a stop. The red door opened and a tall woman stepped into the sun. "This is where you get off," said Bulldog. He lifted the pistol and aimed with one hand while he unfastened the seatbelt with the other. "Get out." Brill used his bound hands to open the door. "Be seeing you," he said over his shoulder as he slid off the seat. He heard the safety click as his feet crunched on the ground. "I better not, man," said Bulldog. "The 2 of us in a room, I don't like the odds of both of us getting out alive." Brill snorted and hip-checked the door closed. Bulldog pulled away toward a motor pool on the far side of the compound as he turned to examine the woman. She was just over 5'8", muscular and solid-looking, with a face that brooked no nonsense. Her prim suit was tailored in a muted gray. Brill could see the bulge of a weapon under her left shoulder. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, no strand loose, as if they feared the consequences of leaving the bun at the base of her skull. "Step inside," she said by way of introduction. Brill admired that she didn't pull her weapon to make the invite. He stepped past her into a large open space. The ceiling soared to the tip of the arched roof, white walls, white tiles, white floor. There was a brick fireplace at the far end of the room with a grouping of 2 sofas that faced each other in front of it, and 2 wing chairs with their backs to him. He could see legs in the chairs, moving, wiggling. 6 men in black suits lined the walls on both sides of the chairs. They wore dark sunglasses and wire earpieces, and their heads were on a swivel, from Brill to the chairs and back again. A soldier stood next to each of the men in black. They had their rifles raised to shoulder, and Brill watched the 6 red dots centered on his chest as he stepped across the floor. No wonder the woman didn't need a weapon. The dots traced him as he walked toward the chairs. A small fire crackled in the hearth. Brill spied a back door next to the edge of the rear wall when it opened to admit a bespectacled corporal. He carried a tray with 3 glasses of dark liquid to the chairs and bent over to serve. Brill watched a hand reach from either chair to take a glass and the corporal stood back with the third next to a sofa. The woman escorted him around the back of one of the sofas by way of the fireplace. Brill could feel the welcome heat radiating across the brick hearth, the crackle of wood as it was consumed and transformed into ash. He almost stopped when he saw the 2 men in the chair. The one on the left noticed the hesitation and smiled. "I think we can do without the restraints." Shelby Johnson held up a glass. "How long has it been since you've had a glass of homemade sweet tea?" The woman tugged his sleeve to arrange his wrists, and flipped open a folding knife to sever the ties. 7 years, said Brill. 6, Shelby corrected. "Have a seat close to the fire." Brill took the last glass from the tray and sat on the sofa. The corporal disappeared through the rear door, and the woman moved to the opposite sofa closest to Shelby. Two of the red dots settled on his chest. He caught the dazzle of one as it centered on his forehead, and assumed the other three targeted his back. They weren't taking any chances. He didn't know if he should be flattered or offended. "Hello, Brill," the other man said in a velvet voice. "Governor. It's President now," Shelby corrected. "Don't guess you keep up with matters back home all the way over there in the jungle." Brill took a sip of tea instead of answering. "You had us worried," the president said. "Our intelligence suggested you died a few years ago. Almost had you a gold star on the wall," Shelby added. "We were going to do something about it, and make it official, but our hands were tied in the matter. Turns out the accolade was unnecessary," said the president. Brill felt them watch him, felt the eyes of everyone in the room on him. "You're wondering why you're here?" Shelby said. He was long and thin, a fringe of hair cut short around his polished pate. He wore round glasses on the middle of his nose so he could peer over the top, and Brill wondered if it was an act designed to throw off anyone sitting across from him. "I was snatched off a beach before breakfast, Senator," said Brill. "Did you eat?" The president smiled. It came out in the southern drawl, all the words connected and smacking of home. "Did you eat?" "No, sir." The president moved his eyes to one of the men in the corner. That was all it took, a sign of power that was impressive. A look to a guard. The man raised a radio on his wrist cuff to his lips and muttered into it. "That whole mess in Africa worked out all right," Shelby said. Brill drained the rest of his sweet tea and gripped the glass. The woman stood from the sofa and took it from him. Smart, he thought. Keep weapons away from him. Any potential weapons. "Mess," said Brill. "Damn sorry about all that," said Shelby. "Course, like I said. We thought you were dead and gone. By the time you popped up on our radar again, the CIA was building a goddamn file on you as thick as a history book. They had a file on him. Executive offerings. Damn right. That son of a bitch running things over there is one slick bastard. Simon Oliver. Mercenary turned CEO. One of the men responsible for making Brill who he was today." Of course, the converse was true too. When they met, Brill was just out of being a kid. Simone was leading forays into the Angolan jungle for the highest bidder, securing mining sites for gold and diamonds, fighting rebels or sometimes fighting the government. Brill's work helped move the man from the bush into an office at the top of a skyscraper. Quid pro quo. "He is a smart man," Brill agreed. "He recognizes talent when he sees it," said the president. "Like we did." "How many scrapes were you in over there, son?" Shelby asked. Brill shrugged. "I didn't count." He remembers. Shelby laughed and slapped the arm of a chair of the man next to him. "Photographic memory. Don't let him fool you." "Eidetic," Brill almost corrected. There was a difference. Not much. He didn't have to read anything to remember and recall it, though that was part of it. The back door opened and the corporal came in with another tray. He was followed by two privates carrying a long folding table and chairs. A third trailed after them with a bundle in his arms. They set up the table and placed settings in less than 30 seconds, moving with practiced precision that was impressive. The corporal plated 4 steaming cheeseburgers, golden fries and 2 pitchers of tea from the tray. "Excellent," the president clapped as he stood up and moved to the head of the table by the fire. "Join me." He motioned for the woman to sit on one side. Shelby moved to his right and Brill sat in the open chair at the far end of the table. "I know it's not much," said the president as he waved for them to tuck in. "But the wife won't let me eat hamburgers at the White House. Trying to cut back my cholesterol." They ate in silence for a few moments. The woman took small delicate bites that were precise and deliberate. She chewed each bite 19 times and washed it down with a sip of tea. Brill noted she grimaced a little after each sip. She didn't like sweet tea. Shelby didn't eat the burger at all. He sliced it in half, then picked up a French fry and worked his way down to the end. The president scarfed his burger with big appreciative bites, chewing with gusto and wiping the juices from his chin after each. Brill ate like a soldier. He tore the burger into pieces and moved fast. It disappeared before the others were half done. Practically starving. "Ate nothing but fish for 3 months, Shelby told the president. The senator took one half of the hamburger and put it on Brill's plate. "My wife would love you to get me to do that," the president said between bites. They had been watching him for months, Brill thought. When had she sent that picture? "Let's just get down to it," said Shelby as he passed the other half of his sandwich to the president. "We've got to get you back before anyone knows you're missing." Shelby pushed his plate away, the rest of his fries untouched. "That EO business is done," he told Brill. Your boss is about to get some indictments that are going to curtail his activities on the Dark Continent. Brill wiped his fingers on the linen napkin and leaned back in his chair. The burger was good. Better than good. And since he hadn't eaten in a day or so, it made it even better. Did you have something to do with the ambush? Shelby waved it off. That bulldog fella is Special Activities Division. You would have been better off asking him. But I can assure you, the president didn't sign off on that. Did you, sir? The president swiped the grease off his lips and popped a fry in his mouth as he shook his head. We want you back working for us again, said Shelby. Now I'm not going to appeal to your patriotic side and that rah-rah bullshit that got you spying for us before. That shit is for kids, and after all the hell you've been through, you sure as hell ain't a kid anymore. Brill finished his second glass of tea and reached for the pitcher. He noticed the dots followed him, and the tension in the room ratcheted at his sudden movement. Everyone is very jumpy, said Brill as he eased back into his seat slow and easy. You can tell them I'm not going to hurt either of you. Shelby flicked a glance at the woman. You didn't mention her. I don't know her, said Brill. She's got a .45 strapped under her shoulder, and a backup piece in the small of her back. I assume she can take care of herself. Shelby laughed and slapped the table. Told you he was a goddamn lethal weapon. He turned to Brill. How many of these soldier boy fuckers could you kill before they got you? 3. Just like that, Shelby turned to the president. I told you he would know. There are 12 men in here, the president said as he watched Brill. That one. That one. And him, Brill pointed to 3 men on the wall. You agents wouldn't fire when I moved because it would put you in line of fire. He motioned to the 3 men in black on the president's side of the table. Those 3 would cover you, and the 4th guy would move you. His fingers moved to show the men he was indicating. The soldiers were told to shoot with precision, but those are automatic weapons. If they shoot, they might get her and the senator. Maybe you too. They're thinking about that. It would affect their aim. Why 3 then? Why not all? That guy, said Brill as he pointed out the Secret Service agent on his left. He's your best. My bet is he would keep his head when it all started and end it as fast as he could. Why not take him first? Shelby couldn't stop smiling. There's a sofa between us. The obstacle would add too much time for him to draw his weapon. The president shared a look with Shelby. You were right. I was. You want me here for the next part? Shelby shook his head. Unless you have any questions. The president shook his head and turned to Brill. I want you to know how sorry I am for what happened. We didn't anticipate it, and if I had known, I would never have asked you to go to South Africa. I'm sorry for the loss of your friend's life, for the havoc it created for her family. And I wanted to apologize with you in person. His blue eyes drilled into Brill and made him feel as if they were the only 2 people in the room. It's made you who you are today, and I want you back on our team. He stood from the table. Shelby and the woman stood with him, and Brill took his feet. I'd come shake your hand, the president said. But I think they won't allow it. The men in black moved to surround him and escorted him toward the front door. This is only going to take 10, Shelby called after the man as they disappeared him through the door. He turned to Brill and sat back down. 5 if you see reason. Brill sat and tilted his chair toward Shelby. Everybody's said they're sorry. We've had lunch. Now it's time to talk politics. He wants you on our side. I want you on our side. You couldn't just ask me on the beach? Yeah, maybe I didn't know the details of how it was going to happen. Technically, you are an enemy combatant working for a mercenary force in a foreign country. That's all by the book shit. This, he waved at the walls. This is off the books shit. Who is she? Brill asked about the woman who hadn't spoken since they entered the room. This is Zelda. She's in charge of this training camp. If you agree, she's going to get you trained up to our specs. Brill didn't need to ask what would happen if he said no. They wouldn't just let him go back to being a surf bum living out of a van beachside. This feels like a Godfather proposition. Shelby nodded. Your file said you're too good for the outfit you were with. Come across the fence, son, and work for us. Come home. Brill nodded. He didn't have much choice. Thought you'd say that, said Shelby. Told the governor I could get you signed up in 5. He glanced at his watch. That took 3. You got this? Zelda nodded. Damn glad you're back, son. Everybody round here works on fucking call signs. I can't wait to hear which one they give you. It's probably going to be Merc or Bushwhacker or some African shit. He didn't offer to shake Brill's hand either. Keep me posted, he said to Zelda. They watched him go through the front door and the back door popped open at the same time. This time the corporal was joined by a giant man in a red tracksuit. It's time to get started, Zelda said, and she motioned Brill to follow as the soldiers cleaned up the remnants of the meal. Render, Chapter 7. Brill followed Zelda across the long expanse of the community room floor. The big man fell in step behind them, but Brill ignored him for the moment. He was a mouth breather, so any move he planned to make would be announced and noisy. Zelda had great calves. They flexed and popped in her sensible shoes. She marched in a cadence, but it wasn't military. Like she was wound up tight and controlling each movement. She didn't swing her hips as she marched. Each step was a minimum expenditure of effort to propel her forward at the maximum distance allowed by the skirt she had on. She opened the door and him to another building across the round drive. It was another cracker box building set up on blocks with a wide hallway that ran down the center. There were 8 doors off the hallway, 4 to a side. She opened the second door on the right and stood back to let him in. It was a 10 by 12 box. Plain white walls. 2 narrow slit windows with mesh panes lined the top of the outside wall. The inside walls were bare. There was a bed along one wall, sheets and a blanket folded on top of a pillow on one end. There was a table and chair in the corner, and a wardrobe beside the door. "Clothes," she said and pointed to the wardrobe. "You should find all you need inside. Dress for PT and report out front in 15 minutes. Brill didn't answer. She grabbed the knob and pulled the door closed. He heard the lock click and wondered how he was supposed to report outside if he was locked in. A quick inspection of the wardrobe showed workout gear in his size, plus 2 pair of BDUs in woodland camo pattern, and running shoes. He wasn't sure what kind of PT Zelda had in mind, so he dressed in shorts and sweatshirt, and laced up a pair of shoes. He folded the suit pants, shirt and jacket inside the wardrobe. Since he still had time, he made the bed and sat on the end. As he sat, his eyes explored the windows and walls. The walls were the weakness. The narrow slot style of the mesh windows was too tight for him to fit. The metal door frame looked reinforced, so whoever built the place had designed it so anyone inside the room wouldn't be kicking their way out. That left the walls. They were whiteboard. Common enough in construction, with a 16-inch on-center spread. Would they have put material in between, he wondered. His grandfather had been a carpenter, a small-town handyman who built additions on houses, and laid more roofs on houses than Brill could count. The man had also used him as an apprentice of sorts, and paid Brill for the work so he could give it to his mother to buy groceries. That's how he knew the distance that was supposed to be between the 2x4 studs. He also knew that governments contracted the work because his grandfather had worked on building the arsenal outside of his hometown. Which meant lowest bidder or military construction corps. The material would be the lowest cost, and these dorms didn't look like they were designed to be prisons. He bet the walls were empty. He was going to check, but there was a small black lens in the corner of the room next to the ceiling above the door. They were watching. If they were watching and saw him tapping the wall, they might figure out what he was doing. So he would wait, he decided. At 14 minutes, the door clicked unlocked. Magnetic, he thought, and got up to exit the room. The big man stood waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. "Try to keep up, shithead," he glared at Brill. He turned and began jogging back up the road. Brill fell in step behind him. It wasn't hard to keep up. The mouth breather began to huff and puff after half a mile. Brill didn't want to tell the man he had clocked thousands of miles in a camp in the jungle. Intelligence like that should be in his file. The huffing and puffing mouth breather came to a path in the woods next to the fence and the trees. It looked like a game trail, single track packed tight from hundreds of feet pounding against it and wearing a narrow depression in the dirt. They ran for 3 miles on the trail. Brill saw the fence on his left the entire way. The 2 men reached the corner of the property and turned right to run next to another fence on the single track. 4 miles later, they did it again. Sweat dripped from the big man, drenching the back of his tracksuit top and dripping down the shaved contours of his buzz-cut head. His jog had turned into a shuffle, breath wheezing in and out sounded like heaving bellows. When they reached the next run, he slowed to a fast walk. Their pace dropped from a 7-minute mile at the start to a 16-minute mile. Brill waited for a break in the edge of the trees and jogged past the big man. "Hey!" He heard him wheeze a shout. Brill popped into an 8-minute mile and ran 4 more miles to the next turn, and 4 miles up to turn again. By that time, the big man was out of sight. He focused on the sounds of his feet swishing on the trail, the feel of the wind in his face. Pine forest smelled very different from the jungle. Less fetid, the air less thick. Part of it was humidity, part of it was place. Since the road was 3 miles from the first turn, he assumed there was a mile left. He slowed to a 10-minute mile, partly to stretch the time, partly to let the big man catch up with him. He reached the road and the sweating giant stood waiting for him, a greasy grin on his slick face. "That was just to show you, you can't escape," he said, still struggling to catch his breath. "You're in a box inside a box, with 2,000 Marines on the other side with orders to shoot on sight if you go over the wire." Brill glanced up the road. They were inside a Marine base, which had to be Camp Lejeune. He tried to recall any smaller naval bases that Marines would guard on the East Coast, but couldn't at the moment. "Got it?" the big man growled. An open-top Jeep roared up the road from the Marine side of the installation. Brill spied Zelda in the passenger seat, the corporal behind the driver's seat. She made a motion with her hand and the Jeep slid to a stop next to them. "Get in," she said. The big man hopped in the narrow back seat, his knees almost touching his chin. Brill stared at her for a moment. She locked eyes with him, and snorted like she wasn't used to waiting. "You have a problem with orders?" "Always." "You can walk back," she said. "Or ride. I don't care." Brill considered it for a moment more and hopped over the back to sit behind the driver. He noticed the young man's shoulders hunch up as he gripped the wheel with both hands. He didn't like having Brill behind him. "Sherman's your babysitter while you're our guest," Zelda shouted over the roar of the tires on the road. Brill glanced at the big man pressing his shoulder against him. "Like a tank," the giant grunted. "You were in the jungle, right? Think we'll call you Tarzan?" "No. Monkey. You look like a monkey. That's what we'll call you." Brill shook his head. "What?" The big man cracked a cruel grin. "You don't want to be called Monkey? How about Cheetah? That was his buddy, right?" "You call me what you want," Brill said. "I'll decide to answer." The Jeep rolled to a stop in front of the main building again. Zelda and Tank hopped out. Brill slid over the side of the back wall and stood with them as the corporal drove off. "PT's done," said Zelda. "You have an hour. I can lock you in your room." She studied him for a moment, lips pursed in deliberation. "Did you show him?" She directed her question to Sherman without looking at him. "He knows," the big man replied. "You can't run," said Zelda. "We're a heavily guarded compound. And if you try to escape, I'll send Sherman to find you." "Am I a prisoner?" "Guest. Do you try to prevent your guests from escaping a lot?" She smirked. "Put him in his room," Sherman growled. Zelda pursed her lips even harder, if that was possible. "Is that what you want?" Brill tilted his head to the side and smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. "What I want doesn't seem to play in the equation. Do you let your guests shower and eat?" "We ate with our visitors." "Visitors can leave, but guests have to stay?" he asked. Sherman grumbled a low growl of disapproval. Brill could feel him shift his weight on the gravel, and tense like a spring for the swing he knew the man wanted to deliver. "Food," Zelda pointed, trying to bleed off the tension. "Showers in the last room in your building." Brill didn't wait to be dismissed. She wasn't a superior officer and besides, if Sherman did throw a punch, he might have to kill the man to prove a point. He might kill him anyway, but he would rather wait to see how the rest of it played out. He would keep his guard up though. They didn't want him dead yet, but a 16-square-mile plot of woods inside a military installation was a great place to hide a body. He didn't want to give them the chance. Render, Chapter 8. He showered first. It was at the end of the hall in his dormitory building. He tried every door on the way to the end and all were locked. The water was hot and he stayed under it longer than normal. Jungle showers were under canvas buckets hung from a tree limb, lukewarm water drizzled just enough to wash off a layer of sweat. Van life showers were close to the same, or cold spray from public heads nailed to 4x4s cemented in the sand. This felt like a little bit of heaven. He soaped up his hair and let the suds drip down his tired body. Then he rinsed and did it again. By the time he grabbed a bar of small soap and ripped the paper off, the room was full of steam. That was okay by him. It felt like the jungle and he was surprised to consider, it felt like home. He let his mind run through random thoughts, not trying to connect dots or to decide anything, just let them flow in and out. They wanted him to work for them. As a mercenary? They had trained soldiers like Bulldog, men who could follow orders and do black ops. Why would they bother picking him up on a South African beach just to put him in a squad? He had a skill set, yes, and certain flexibilities in moral areas, but most soldiers did. Or at least they did in battle. He had no doubt that Sherman would roll right over him if given the chance. Which is why he couldn't fight the man. Sherman would knock him down and stop. He might deliver a punishing blow or three, but that was it. Brill wouldn't stop until the man was dead. It was just the way he felt about threats. Simon had tried to reason with him about it, that there was gray area in his all-or-nothing philosophy. Not for Brill. Gray area yes, when it came to certain things, but for threats and how to approach them, it was simple math. He wanted to spend zero time looking over his shoulder, Zero time worrying about some beaten enemy looking for payback. The PT didn't worry him. He wondered what they had in store for the next round. There were 4 thick towels on a simple stand next to the sink. Brill dried off with one and wrapped it around his waist. He stepped into the hallway and stopped. Zelda stood at the front door and watched him. The floorboard creaked behind him and he lunged to the right. A baton pressed against him and shocked him rigid. He collapsed to the floor, muscles locked as pain coursed through his nervous system. Sherman giggled. "We're training you to be aware," he said as he leaned over Brill's prone body. "You can't relax for even a minute here." Brill made a pained noise. "What's that, monkey?" Sherman leaned a little closer. "You want to tell me how much you suck?" Brill launched a weak punch into the man's chin. Sherman caught it, and slammed the 2 metal prongs of a cattle prod into his underarm. He pressed it again and this time, he didn't stop until Brill passed out. Render, Chapter 9. Ice chunks of frozen water crashed across his face and chest and ripped him from a dream. The first thing he saw when the water cleared his eyes was the grinning face of Sherman, plastic bucket in hand. "Rise and shine, asshole." His arms were bound with a rope that ran over a rafter in the corner of an empty warehouse building. The bare concrete floor was covered in dust, except where his ice bath had turned it into sludge and mud. He was naked. Sherman dropped the bucket and went to the rope where it was tied to a cleat in the wall. He yanked it down, which lifted Brill up to the very tip of his toes, and tied it off. "This is the torture training part," Sherman said as he stalked toward the hanging man. Brill was forced to stay on his toes. If he relaxed, the upward angle of his bound wrists yanked on his shoulder blades, and felt like they were about to rip out of the socket. "Course, if it was up to me," the big man settled in front of him. "Torture training would be the biggest part." He grinned. Rancid breath washed over Brill's face. "Looks like you've seen a pain or two," said Sherman. "Zelda told me to take it easy on you." He spread his feet in a classic boxing stance and sent a quick 1-2 punch into Brill's ribs. It knocked him off his toes and he swung in agony for a moment, until he ripped skin off on the concrete trying to gain purchase and stand straight. "I'll pull the punches," Sherman assured him before he went to work again. He was true to his work. Each hit landed hard enough to bruise, hard enough to hurt. They were well placed, well timed. Brill felt like a heavy bag going through a workout. Sherman started sweating and huffing and backed away. Brill wanted to relax, but didn't dare take the pressure on his shoulders. His skin ached, his muscles screamed as red marks promised to turn yellow and blue. "You want to take a break?" Sherman asked. He grabbed the bucket and dipped it into a trough full of ice water next to the door. "This will help with the swelling." He threw the bucket of water across Brill. The ice shocked his system, 1,000 tiny needles of agony drilling into his bare skin. His muscles cramped and contorted, as shivers threatened to tip him off balance. Ready to go again, Sherman moved in. Brill took a deep breath. The man was having fun hurting him. He waited for Sherman to lock his feet shoulder-width apart, then let his shoulders hold his weight as he lashed out with 2 feet across the man's face. Bone cracked and Sherman screamed as he tumbled backwards. Brill swung his feet, hanging like a pendulum, and bit back a scream as his shoulders protested the movement. He hooked his feet around the rope holding him to the wall and finagled some of his weight on it. It pulled him up as it pushed down, and he finally did scream. But he was able to grip the rope between sweat-slicked hands, and relieve the pressure off his joints. He got a few inches up the rope and gripped it tight. Sherman bellowed as he pounded across the concrete. Brill swung out of reach. The big man swiped at him, missed. He grabbed the rope attached to the wall, and hauled on it. It lifted Brill higher off the floor. He held tight as the big man let go, let Brill's weight and gravity yank him down. Brill bounced on the end of the rope. It slid through his hands and peeled skin. But he held on. Sherman lunged for him again. Brill put a foot out, caught him in the shoulder, and used their momentum to fold his leg in a triangle around Sherman's neck. He locked it tight under his other leg and squeezed as he tried to hold himself up with the rope. Sherman punched his thigh, his calves. He sent upward roundhouse swings into Brill's battered torso. The hanging man squeezed tighter, locked in the hold. All the big man had to do was drop. The weight of his massive body would rip the rope out of Brill's blood-slick and burned hands, and Sherman could catch his breath as Brill dangled. The shock of choking didn't let him think. All Sherman could do was punch, and hit. He couldn't consider any other option. Brill felt the punches get weaker. He was glad for it. They hurt. A lot. He didn't know how many more he could take. Sherman's arms dropped and Brill felt him slide toward the floor. He let go and didn't even wince when the massive skull bounced off the concrete and split open a gash that leaked crimson into the dust. Brill stood on the body under him, using it to leverage his hands. The knot was complicated and it took several moments to get it undone. He could feel the slow rise and fall of the chest under his tortured feet, so at least he hadn't killed Sherman. Not yet, though he was considering it when the rope came undone and spooled off his mangled wrists. They were scraped raw and bleeding, along with his hands and toes. He stepped away from the body and considered crushing his throat with the bottom of his foot. Brill decided against it. Decided it wasn't time, in case this was an exercise and not some sociopath's idea to go off the rails. He moved to the door in the wall and grabbed the knob. It slid through his blood-slick hand the first time, and he had to use both hands to crank it open. Outside, twilight settled across the compound. The door opened on the backside of the warehouse. There was 20 yards of bare ground between Brill and the woods. He stepped into the grass, leaving bloody footprints as he angled toward the trees. He wasn't sure where he would go or how he would get there, but he knew that he was safer in the woods. He could rest, and let his mind figure out what to do. A bright white spotlight painted his back and cast a long shadow on the ground in front of him. He didn't turn around, just waited for the bullet. "Congratulations," Zelda said in a flat voice. Her voice sounded amplified. Brill turned and held up a hand to block the light. They could shoot him in the front, just as well as the back. "You've earned a night of rest," she said. "Your barracks are on your right." The light winked off and left him blinking against a blue explosion of stars that made him night-blind. He heard the warehouse door open, saw a dark Suburban back up and 2 men wheel a gurney out of the back. Brill guessed they weren't going to shoot him. And he was right not to kill Sherman. Not yet, anyway. He hobbled across the bare space in the direction she had indicated and found the entrance to his barracks 3 buildings over. The compound was empty but for a few guards, and the 2 men who wheeled out Sherman on a gurney. No one offered to help him. No one made a comment. They ignored him as he opened the door to the building and slipped inside. Render, Chapter 10. There was a first aid kit on the bed in his room. Brill didn't let the door close behind him. A small alarm began to blare after 15 seconds, but he ignored it. He shoved the door further back and hooked it with a hanger from the wardrobe. Then he grabbed the kit and hanger and let the door close behind him as he shuffled to the next room down and across the hall. It took 30 seconds to pick the lock with the hanger to a carbon copy of his room with an unmade bed with waiting bedding against the opposite wall. He slid inside the room and let the door close. He used the hanger to pry the small pinhole camera from the corner by the door and twisted the wires undone. He wrapped the hanger around the doorknob and hooked it into the frame. It wouldn't stop a determined kick or shoulder, but it would slow whoever was trying to come in long enough for him to react. He sat on the edge of the bed and tended the raw wounds on his wrists one at a time, then his toes. He couldn't do anything for the bruises except swab antiseptic where thick knuckles had scraped away the skin, and dry swallow for aspirin. Brill curled up on the bed without making it and wrapped a blanket over his battered body. Sleep came fast as he slowly warmed up under the blanket. He waited for the dreams to come. They were always the same. No matter how many people he killed, how many battles he fought, the dreams were about the one he couldn't win. He heard her scream, felt the ropes that bound his hands to the legs of a table. Watched her bright blue eyes dim with pain, and then the spark left them as she died. There was nothing he could do in life to save her. And nothing in the dream could keep her safe. No matter how hard he trained, how much grit he could muster. It wouldn't make a difference. She would always be gone. He woke to a knock on the door. There wasn't a clock in the room, but it felt like a lot of time had passed. He slid out of the bed slowly, muscles aching in protest as he took a moment to wobble to the door. He unfastened the hanger and stood to one side as he twisted the knob and let the door fold in. "This isn't your assigned room," Zelda said as she stood out of reach in the hallway. "I'll have to make a change to the roster." "Not my problem," said Brill. She made a displeased noise in her throat. "Do you require medical attention?" She pulled out a notebook and held a pen over it. "That would have been a good offer last night. We were tending to a problem you created," she said. "I broke your tank?" There was that noise again, a grumpy harumph in the back of her throat. "He was a highly trained agent," she admonished. "It cost us quite a bit of time and effort to prepare him for his duties." "Put it on my bill," said Brill. She glanced at the thin sheet wrapped around his waist. "You can get dressed," she said. "We can discuss the rest over breakfast." Zelda waited for him at the door as he dressed. He followed her with a limp as she led the way across the pea gravel circle to the commissary. It was a small room with a long stainless steel buffet under warming lights. The choices were limited to protein, carb, soupy vegetable and a roll, but Brill prepared a plate and sat at a table. It was tasteless but warm as they ate together in silence. A function more than anything. Zelda finished first, but her portions were smaller. She waited for Brill to push away his plate. Are you going to ask about Sherman? Brill shrugged and took a drink of lukewarm water from a plastic glass. I don't care about Sherman. His trachea is bruised. Does that mean he can't talk? Talk, she nodded. Can't eat solids. He shrugged again. Not my problem. It's my problem, she said. Therefore, it is your problem. He was supposed to train me. Train me to be tortured, Brill sipped. Train you to be prepared for what might happen in the field. Brill leaned across the table and was impressed she didn't flinch away. Does your file tell you the kind of training I've had? She shook her head. There are elements from your time with EO that we can't confirm. And before? Her brow crinkled in confusion. You weren't in it before. Brill leaned back. There were holes in his life story they didn't know about. Or maybe someone knew and they weren't sharing it with her. 4 years recce, said Brill. More with EO. I think I can take what you're going to dish out. She studied him for a moment. It's highly irregular. He nodded to a folder she kept on the tabletop. Your training agenda? She nodded. Set up the final tests, he said. Cockiness can get you killed. He shook his head. I'm confident I can pass most of them, he said. The ones I don't, that's where we concentrate on training. Her eyes flashed in triumph. I see, she said. But who conducts the training? Sherman was your only guy? I handpicked him. You made a poor choice, said Brill. He liked hurting people. It would cause him to make bad decisions in the field. He was doing his job. His job almost got him killed. By you. By me. We could have stopped you. Brill launched himself across the table, sliding through the empty plastic plates and glasses. They clattered to the floor as he slammed into Zelda and tilted her over backwards. He rode her down to the floor, but shifted to take the brunt of his weight off of her and onto his injured shoulder. As he rolled away, he snatched the weapon from her holster and aimed it at the door. He planted his knee on her chest and held her down by the neck. Be still, he warned and fired 2 shots into the frame above the door. Shoot high, so there's no chance of hitting anyone, he said. Unless you have an NBA guard on stilts. He held the smoking barrel close to her cheek. Close enough to feel the heat, but he didn't press it against her skin. You have a smaller weapon in a slide in your back, he said. The only way you can stop me is if I let you. He dropped her weapon on her chest and moved away. The door to the room crashed in under a steel battering ram as Brill held up his hands and planted them on his head. He backed into the wall as 4 guards poured through the door, MP4s aimed at his head. They screamed and yelled at him to hit his knees, and he complied. Zelda stood up and checked her weapon. Stand down, she shouted at the guards. Stand down. She had to repeat it louder because of all the noise they were making. Brill waited on his knees under the shaking short barrels of the rifles aimed at him. Zelda pushed between the guards. I'm not impressed, she lied. I have to get this uniform dry cleaned now. Blood stains are harder to get out. I've got him, she told the guards. Resume your watch. The guards let their weapons go slack on short-strapped slings and marched through the door. You get the rest of the day to recover, she told him. Your freedom extends to the perimeter around the buildings. He watched her turn and walk away, stains dotting her skirt. After she left, he got off of his knees and looked at his own food-littered clothing. If this kept up, he would need to find a laundry or more gear first. Chapter 3. Are you a virgin? She said. No, he answered, but he might as well have been. He hadn't known the touch of a woman since Lorette, nor truth be told he hadn't wanted to be with anyone else. There were mostly men around since her, and after what the rebels had done to him, what they made him watch, what they did to her, he never felt much sexual desire. Sure, occasionally he would wake up with a throbbing hardness that pulsed as he drifted in that netherworld between waking and sleep, so he knew he was still capable. And now, even as this blonde sun goddess of surf eased her mostly naked body closer to him, he could feel his pulse quickening and a familiar warmth stirring between his legs. He wondered what to tell her, if anything, of his past. Yet she seemed the kind of person who didn't concern herself with the past unless it was to speak of the waves that morning, nor was she the type to be preoccupied with tomorrow. She looked at him in the now, her green eyes flecked with golden spots and a spray of freckles scattered across her thin nose as she licked her thick lips. Then you know what to do? He nodded and licked his lips in return. She darted in and kissed him, pulling back after a moment as if to ask if it was okay what she did. His scarred hands found the back of her neck and he pulled her closer to press his mouth to hers, and she was on him, her arms wrapped around him, her legs sliding over his, bare skin on skin that tingled with latent electricity. He throbbed and she pulsed and throbbed with him. The first time didn't last as long as he would have liked. She enveloped him with a velvety warmth and he spasmed with an apology that she kissed off his lips, and ignored his weak protests to run her fingers across the scars on his chest, the bulging muscles in his biceps and crevices carved in his stomach. Each finger followed a line or seam trailing fire across his skin, and he did the same, tickling the tan lines on her back, the triangles patches of white over each rose-tipped breast, until he was ready again and she was ready for him. The second time was better, longer and slower, the hurried rush falling away into a slow melodic rhythm that matched the crest and crash of the surf, moving in crests like the wave. She gripped his shoulder in each hand and shuddered, her legs clamping across him and drawing him deep as she held her breath and moaned out a giggle, and then he was done again and collapsed beside her, their sweat mixing and cooling in a soft breeze blowing through the open back of the van facing the ocean. Brill woke with her name on his lips, like a whisper. He stared at the hole in the wall near the ceiling where he ripped the camera out. The lens dangled on the end of the wire like a spider. They couldn't be watching, he said to himself, and even if they were, they couldn't read his mind. He sat up and folded the scratchy blanket back. At least they had let him sleep. He wondered for how long. The ache in his body told him a lot of time had passed, but some of it could be attributed to the abuse. Most of it, he shivered in the crisp morning air. He dressed in the same workout attire he had donned after his shower and vowed to get a watch or a clock to better tell time in this forgotten place. There was a light knock on the door. Brill stepped to one side, so that if anyone came through with a weapon, they would have to sweep it toward the bunk and back of the narrow room. It wouldn't buy him much time, but any extra second could provide an edge. The knob twisted and the door moved in. "Sir," a nervous voice cracked. Brill peeked around the edge of the door and spied the corporal. He didn't wear a name tag, nor any ornamentation on his simple BDUs. "Sir," the corporal repeated. "It's time for training." Brill nodded and stepped forward. The kid nearly tripped over himself as he rushed to back up and get out of the way. "Which way?" He waited. The corporal recovered and nodded in the direction of the front door. "Lead on," Brill told him. The young man licked his lips and paled. He didn't look too sure about having Brill at his back and kept glancing over his shoulder as he marched toward the door. "Coffee?" Brill asked. The corporal shook his head, but Brill ignored it and changed direction toward the commissary. "Sir," the voice squeaked again after several steps. He scuffed across the gravel to catch up. "Sir," he repeated. "We're going this way." Brill nodded. "Yes, we're going this way to get coffee. Then we can go your way." "But sir," the corporal's voice cracked again. Brill glanced at him again. "You're not military, are you?" he said as he kept walking. The corporal puffed out his chest. "I am." "No," Brill said. "I don't think so. Not yet. Too fresh. You've got some of it down, the mannerisms, the talk, but you don't have conviction." The corporal shifted closer to Brill and his body language changed. He settled into a confident gait next to him and marched in time. "I'm not military," the corporal smiled and looked 10 years older. "What was it that gave it away?" "Everybody gets a little cocky after at," said Brill. "I could have been nervous next to a dangerous man," the corporal said. "Are you?" "Hell yeah," he grinned. "After what you did to Sherman, you've got everyone scared." Brill snorted. "You don't act scared." "That's just it," the man answered. "I'm acting." "Is that my training?" "Not yet," he said. "But it will be soon. First, you have to pass a shooting test." Brill grabbed a cup of poured black coffee and from an urn. He passed the cup to the corporal who took it and fished off 2 plastic lids from a station. He capped his cup and passed one to Brill. "What's after that?" There was that grin again. "I can't say," said the man. "You have to pass first." Brill took a sip of coffee. "Ready?" He nodded and walked beside the corporal out of the door and across the compound. "Render, chapter." She picked him up in a Suburban XL. He assumed the XL meant extra long because there was a large cargo space behind the empty third-row seat. A big truck designed for big purposes carrying serious men to do serious damage. Except it had been subverted by tiny soccer moms ferrying grubby groups of grass-stained players from field to field. Not this particular one. It was government all the way. AM/FM radio from the factory. No bells. No whistles. Plain black exterior. The only thing custom about it was the window tint. He could tell it wasn't armored by the way it rolled. An armored truck sits heavy on the ground, 1,000 pounds of extra weight. This felt light by comparison, a feathered yacht floating on the blacktop. "Aren't you going to ask where we're going?" She held the wheel with one hand, casual. The other was tucked under her coat, gripped the edge of a hidden pistol. He shrugged. "I'll know when we get there." It wasn't an attempt to be tough. She had seen it already, Read more about it in a manila file folder they kept on him. She knew how tough he was. His relaxation made her more relaxed. He watched the tension in her right forearm loosen up. Not much, like flexing a muscle. Enough though. She remained in that semi-rigid state for the next 30 minutes of the drive. As if she expected him to do something, make a move, and hoped he wouldn't. He wondered how she felt. Like sitting next to a tiger, he imagined. An apex predator. It was in the way she sensed him, he knew. The way most people sensed him. A primal think, part of the monkey mind that kept her ancestors alive a million years ago when so many others did not. Suppressed now, by civilization and a softness, by dinner in front of the television and board meetings where people argued about things they thought were important. Still there though. That feeling. Still able to pick up on whatever atomic level vibration he was giving off, like a pheromone that perked up her ears and dilated her pupils and sped up her heart rate. Adrenal glands dumping pump after pump of adrenaline in her system, the monkey mind screaming run. Hide. He admired her for the fight. The struggle wasn't obvious, but she was putting up a good fight against every instinct coursing through her veins. He shifted against the passenger door, putting space between them, giving her a sense of security. She glanced at him and worked hard to keep her face impassive. She almost succeeded. "We're close," she told him. Thinking his movement was a fidget. Thinking he was getting bored. He nodded. "Still don't want to say where?" "Most people ask," she said. "Do you give them an answer?" She shook her head. A strand of hair pulled loose from the tight ponytail and drifted across her slender neck. They drove another 15 minutes in silence as the miles ticked off underneath them. She pulled between two red brick buildings in an old industrial area of a town. He didn't know the name. One of thousands that dotted the area, he thought. Mills and factories had once been as prevalent as spring dandelions until the companies that owned them shut them down to move operations overseas. It left the buildings, the structures vast and empty on the edges of towns, untouched, unwanted and unused for decades. The kinds of places criminals liked, he thought. Two identical black SUVs pulled in at the opposite end of the road between two buildings and parked facing them. "Do you know what this is?" She put their truck in park and kept her right hand under her coat. "Payback," said Brill. "A test," she corrected him. He sighed. "You don't think it's fair?" She raised an eyebrow. Still shifted away from him, still scared, he thought. "No," he said. "I do not. We know how you work one-on-one," she said. "One-on-two even. This is only a test." She tried to keep the smirk out of her voice. Failed. He put a hand on the door handle. "How far away are the medics?" "We'll get them to you fast," she said. "I won't need them." He stepped out of the truck and closed the door after him. 8 doors cracked open at the far end of the roadway. 4 guys climbed from each car, left the doors open and moved to the front of the SUVs. He shook his head as he studied them and started marching across the distance at a deliberate pace. They were of a type. Large, like football players. Broad shoulders. Thick hands. Buzz cuts. Recruited for delivering punishment, he thought. Bruisers. This was going to hurt. 2 in the middle moved to meet him as the others fanned out and circled around, like the ends of a crescent moon closing in. 8-on-1 was stupid. 8-on-1 wasn't fair, no matter what kind of fight. But she brought 8 for a reason. They knew he was tough. She wanted revenge. Revenge for what he did to her chosen boy. The gap between them closed. She watched 2 right fists clench in anticipation. "One chance," he told them. "That's all you get." He heard a couple of them laugh. They thought it was big talk. Bravado. Part of it was just that. Talk. Make them think he was nervous. Scared. Trying to buy time. The 2 reached him at the same time, reached for him at the same time. He dropped to his knees and punched straight out from the shoulder. Straight into their groins. Krav Maga training from a Mossad agent who hated him. Bruisers expected boxing. Wrestling. A lot of them went for MMA, and were good at it where size and weight had an advantage. If they got him to the ground. He danced up and delivered 2 kicks, spinning from one chin to the next. The first 2 were out of the game. Their absence created a hole in the moon, a gap he kept walking through. 3 on his left, 3 on his right as he turned and backed toward their vehicles. One of the 6 would break, he knew. Get a group of more than 3 guys together, 1 or 2 were hotheads. Hotheads moved fast, made impulsive decisions. The second to the left bolted toward him, arms wide to scoop him up and slam him to the concrete. It would knock the wind out of him, and with 200+ pounds holding him down, probably the fight too. He ducked and twisted, and caught an ankle with his. There was enough momentum to drag him off balance and knock Brill sideways. But the guy went down and slid. The move shifted Brill closer to the first guy on the left. He grabbed him and punched. Brill ducked and took the blow on the top of his head. It hurt. There might have been stars. Little birds that twirled and twittered. The guy yanked again, hauled him close. Brill used the pull and slammed into him. Sent a punch to the groin. It worked twice, why not a third time? His opponent shifted, took the blow on his thick thigh. Brill jammed up, caught the exposed throat with the edge of his hand and the guy let him go. The others were too close, coming in fast. If they had a gun, he'd be dead. But they were just supposed to deliver punishment. Watching three go down fast, didn't stop the others, and the fourth guy was on his feet now, moving in with the others. They should have coordinated better. Decided who would do what. Hell, they could have bum-rushed him against the side of one of the SUVs and pounded him into submission, one to each arm and leg. Bruisers don't do strategy though. They wade in and rely on their size to overwhelm their enemy. Brill darted in an opening and ran toward the parked cars. They chased. He spun around, grabbed an outstretched arm as the first one made a grab and sent him into the grill of a truck. The last three closed in and there was nowhere to go. They punched. He kicked. Their blows landed, hard and heavy. He felt warm blood gush from a hit to his scalp, the hot white lance of pain stinging. Brill caught a thumb on a fist and bent it backwards until it snapped. Someone screamed. Maybe it was him. One of the last two grabbed him by the arms, lifted him up, held him so the other guy could move in. Brill sent a foot into his knee that folded sideways, into his face when he fell forward. Then it was just two, and there was blood in his eyes. He couldn't see. He twisted and fought, and the guy slammed him into the ground, crawled on top of him, pinned him down. He jerked his head up, chewed a hunk from his neck as the man screamed and tried to get away. Brill let him roll off and crawl, leaking a trail of blood between his fingers. He stood up and spit the nastiness out of his mouth and stared. The bodies between him and her writhed and moaned. There was a lot of blood. Some of it his. He pushed a slick pattern of it back from his face and glared at her across the length of the roadway. She got out of the SUV and raised the pistol. Stay there. Brill danced back, put the thin door between them. That was no protection though. He scooted into the wheel well under the steering column and saw the keys still in the ignition. He cranked the engine, clawed it into reverse and backed up as he slid into the seat. Brill watched her jump back into her vehicle before he squealed around the corner and raced away. Chapter 4. What he wanted was a left, right, left. He'd settle for a right, left, right. Any move to put a building between him and the SUV he knew was following. The thrum of the heavy engine rumbled of the crumbling brick walls as he jammed the accelerator to the floor. The roadway between the two warehouses opened up into a giant parking lot. There must have been 1,000 spaces for workers of old, in the 50s and 60s back when the industrial park was full. All the lines were faded or gone, weeds and grass reclaiming the blacktop. No buildings. No alleyways to slip down, to zig and zag and hide. Just the three-story blocky structures bracketing the road he just exited. Brill cranked the wheel right, spun the truck around in a tight turn and lined up the driver's door with the brick. So close he could touch it if he reached out. He could see the grime on the brick, the cracks in the mortar as he angled the wheels. His mind raced in calculations, but a lot was out of his control. How fast she was going. The speed of his vehicle. Then she was out and it was all reactions and physics. He shoved the pedal to the metal. The big V8 roared as he surged toward her. He saw the flash of her white face as her head turned toward him. Too far to see the details, but he imagined her surprise, and her reflexes were amazing. She hauled left, trying to spin away, to move out of his path. But couldn't. His passenger side plowed into the rear panel of her right side as she was spinning left. Wheels screamed, metal crunched and crumpled. He turned into the impact, trying to keep them connected, but her speed was greater than his and she whirled away. He kept going across the parking lot. Raced away while she recovered. 10 seconds, he figured. 15 if he was lucky. A hit like that wasn't hard. There wasn't enough time to build up the speed to disable her. To take her out of the chase. Just enough to disorient her. Rattle her. Make her second guess. Buy time for him to make the parking lot and hit the street. Build up more speed to get away. He flicked his eyes up to the rear view and watched her. She rolled her car back in line to follow him. 200 yards. 300 yards. Then he was on the street and she was out of sight. For now. He searched hard for a way to keep it like that. It was a problem. The road he was on was a long stretch of straight and narrow. In a big town, it wouldn't be a problem. There would be 100 little side streets leading off to small buildings, large apartment buildings. Tiny pocket suburbs with quaint houses on semicircle blacktops. This town was too small for that. The straightaway entered a forest, and he glanced in the rearview mirror. So far, so good. Trees bordered the road. Thin at first, saplings no bigger than his legs. Thicker, older pines filled in the gaps next, deeper beyond the roadway. He'd been in a dozen towns like this growing up. Logging companies loved them. Go in and clear-cut 100 acres to fill up trucks for the sawmill, plant saplings in neat orderly rows to harvest 20 years later. These woods hadn't been touched. Which meant there would be hunters, and where there were hunters, there were roads. They wouldn't be much. Just ruts carved through breaks in the trees. Wide enough to fit a four-wheel drive. The trick was finding one at the speed he was going. He couldn't slow down, he thought as he flicked his eyes up to the rearview mirror. She was a dot, a smudge chasing him. If he slowed to find a space between the trees, she would catch him. He couldn't stay on the road though. She would be on the radio now, calling in backup. There would be a roadblock ahead, packed with more big guys or regular cops. He didn't want to hurt them. The cops, not the hired muscle. Brill spied the opening a second later. It was a thin spot where overhead power lines cut through the forest. An overgrown service road for the work trucks meandered next to the giant metal poles carrying electrical wires from a generator to somewhere. Another town, he thought. This one used, this one populated. Direction wasn't a choice. He spun the wheel right and bounced on the uneven surface. It was pockmarked with potholes, just two worn paths in the overtall grass. It needed to be mowed, and they hadn't, not for a month or longer. The grass scrunched under the tires, dragged the undercarriage of the SUV. He went as fast as he could, which wasn't fast at all, but put another 100 yards between him and the road. Then he cranked the truck into the trees and slammed on the brakes. Again, it wasn't much. Not nearly enough space or time. He jumped from the seat and checked the cargo space in the back. No time for inventory. He grabbed two black bags and crossed the webbed slings over each shoulder like a giant axe. They were heavy, bulky. He could explore later. Right now, he had to run. He settled the bags against his hips, held them still with his hands and waddled into the woods at a glacial pace. Brill could hear her car bouncing on the dirt path, the engine roaring as she caught sight of his stalled vehicle. He moved further, shifting behind trees, putting space between them. He would be easy to find. An experienced tracker wouldn't have a problem. He bet she didn't have that skill. Bet she would look into the woods, pistol in hand, and wait for backup. A helicopter would be coming. Maybe dogs. The smart money was on a couple of dogs, and a massive response team. He took 8 men out of a fight in less than a minute using speed and surprise. They wouldn't let him surprise them again. It was hard to think while jogging, while the big bags banged against his legs, and the heavy weight of the straps bit into his shoulders. She would call in and SOG to hunt him. Special operations groups trained to find rebels. They could label it a training exercise, and drop a platoon of rangers in with him. Let them comb the woods and beat the bushes. Or set a perimeter, he decided. A wide net of soldiers in a sightline circle, with an SOG team moving in as the noose grew tight. That's how Simon would have done it. That's how she would do it if she was smart. And he didn't think she was stupid. Mad. Pissed that her lesson got thwarted, that she would have to answer to Shelby for it. Not for giving it, but for losing control. He paused for a moment and leaned with his back on the wide bole of a tree. Sweat dripped from his head, soaked his shirt. It was going to be a problem after dark, when temperatures dropped. Right now, he just had to deal with it. He slipped one bag off his shoulder and zipped it open. Weapons. He pulled a modified MP4 and 4 magazines from foam cutouts in the bag and checked it all. It wasn't a go bag, too light for that. More like a short-action bag, for those moments when full-on frontal assault was needed in an urban setting. He short-strapped the rifle to his chest and clipped 2 magazines to the web strap. The chopper zoomed by overhead, north of his position. He wasn't worried she could see him. Pine woods were just like a jungle after a few hundred yards. There was undergrowth and brambles, bushes and fallen limbs in the close proximity of different-sized tree trunks. It reduced the field of view. He was hidden. It would play to his advantage when her backup arrived. And play against him too. He shifted the bag over his shoulder and took off again. Brill wanted to put more distance between him and the power line road, and clean out the rest of the weight in the bag before he let it go. Chapter 5. It happened like he thought. Or at least he guessed it did. He kept moving through the trees, sticking with the same direction more or less that mirrored the power lines. He couldn't see them, but unless they took an abrupt turn, he was good. Power companies liked to use the path of least resistance when it came to moving electricity, and a straight line was the cheapest, most efficient way they could do it. The choppers came in fast. Faster than he would have thought. Either the teams were standing by, or she had a lot more power at her disposal than he imagined. It was Shelby, thought Brill. Of course the senator had power. He could hear them hover around the woods, and knew they were dropping teams at various points. The soldiers would spread out to create the net and close it in on him. He stopped and rested for a moment as he cleaned out the first bag. K-bar knife, he strapped to his belt. 2 MREs, a flashlight, emergency blanket, fire starter, trauma kit and shotgun shells. He unzipped the second bag to find a second MP4, and the same supplies, minus a shotgun and shells. He loaded and strapped the second gun, ripped the foam holders out of one bag and transferred the rest of the supplies to it. He adjusted the straps so it rested in the small of his back, just below the second rifle, and kept one hand on the rifle strapped to his chest. "Not that I'll use it," he muttered. He wasn't going to kill a soldier for hunting him. That was just as bad as killing a cop for only doing his job. If they shot first, he would try to evade. Better still to just stay out of their way. It was tough. He didn't know where he was. Not the particulars anyway. The terrain suggested the south, and the power lines had to go somewhere. There would be soldiers there too, blocking the way, watching. Waiting, he decided. Holding out until dark. Except the men hunting him would have night vision goggles. He didn't have those in his bag. Advantage hunters. He tossed the extra empty bag up into the low branches of a tree, and tried to keep it close to the trunk. Not a great job at hiding it, but if the men moved past it and kept their eyes on the ground, it could be missed. He scuffed up pine needles in long dragging marks as he took off. A little effort to keep eyes down, and moving in a direction. He walked softer after a dozen feet. Stealth training in the jungles of South Africa and Angola had taught him how to move as prey. He had been both. Prey first, then the hunter. That was the training. He wanted to think beyond the hunt. What to do next? But that was a problem. To get to the next, he had to get through this first. If he made it out of the woods alive, he could decide where to go. What to do. But in the back of his mind, he had an idea. The germ of a plan, really. A seed. Something that could grow into a plan. Call it a goal. An overarching goal. Shelby had pulled him from SA, so he would go back. He had been happy there, living off fish and sunshine and sweaty nights in the arms of a woman he cared about. Before he could return though, he had to make sure she was safe. There were indications of blackmail. They would hurt her unless he did as they said. The conclusion he reached was simple. Eliminate them. It was Simon's training. Once you determine a man was a threat, don't discuss it, don't talk about it, just solve it. Either remove the threat or disable it with enough force that it serves as a deterrent. It was simple, really. These people took orders. It was a pyramid leading up to one man sitting behind a desk. He may claim it was only a strategy, that he left the tactics to his boots on the ground, but he called the shots. The goal was clear. Shelby had to go. But first, he had to get out of the woods. The jungle had a sound all its own. Living things buzzed, hummed, breathed. The wind in the leaves, the rustle of small animals, 1,000 moving living things churning in a whirl around him. The woods were no different. The sounds were, but they're all the same. Squirrels in the leaves. Birds flittering through the branches. Breeze in the pine boughs. The roar of chopper engines hovering around his position, like the grumble of angry animals in the distance. He listened as he walked, the soft scuff of his boots on the pine needles like the beat of a snare drum. He soaked it in and memorized it. So that he could tell when it was different. He could feel the dead spot in front of him as he approached. Brill slipped behind a tree and studied the layout. The trees were too thick for long-range visibility, but the dead spot wasn't quite silent. There were other boots moving on the ground, scuffing and pounding. A slow deliberate march. He watched and waited, eyes locked on an angle away from the silent spot almost in front of him. A flash of movement caught his eye, 20 yards south. A camel-clad body moving in a crouch, gun held to shoulder, eyes locked forward. Searching the ground. Brill lifted his arms and grabbed the lowest tree branch. He had picked a thick tree wide enough to hide his body, and with cover low enough to reach. He pulled himself over the branch, set one leg near the base at the trunk and kept climbing. His movements were as slow as the men approaching. He stopped at 12 feet because they were too close. The trunk couldn't hide him anymore. He leaned back against the tree, and slid the web strap loose around his neck to give the rifle in his hand more play. He hoped he wouldn't have to use it. He could make 2 shots with no problem if they looked up and discovered him. The third guy could spray the tree, and though 12 feet wasn't a far jump, all the noise would pull the rest this way. Plus they had radios. He could see the black patch microphones attached to their throats. A scuff on a root below drew his eyes down. The soldier who created the first dead spot moved under him, eyes locked on the ground, rifle swinging back and forth in a methodical pattern. He was good. Ranger, just like Brill guessed. Except he didn't look up. No one ever looked up. Brill didn't even breath as the man moved under him and past him. He wasn't the problem. The problem came from the other two, 60 feet to either side of him. They might notice a disruption in the pattern of the tree. Nature had lines. Any variation to the line would draw the eye. It settled in the brain, like an afterthought, and a smart person would take a second look. A closer look that would reveal a man crouching on a branch, back pressed against the pine bark. He didn't move and hoped their peripheral vision was narrowed by a tunnel focus forward. It was. They didn't. The soldiers kept their line moving, kept going, kept hunting. Brill waited. They thought it was a training exercise, he bet. They would be focused, thinking there was a prize, like capture the flag. It would relax their vigilance, just enough. He waited longer, until the dense trees hid the men, until the cone of silence shifted around him and followed the men. The woods behind him came alive again. At least until he moved and lowered himself from the tree. But the soldiers weren't listening, or they were too far ahead to notice the different grade in the sound level. Brill double-checked his surroundings, and set a fast pace toward an unknown destination. Chapter 6. Brill thought about pioneers. Most people who didn't know history thought the roads must have always been there. Wide strips of smooth pavement broken up by the occasional pothole, leading to all points north, south, east and west. There was even proof of those old roads. Wagons needed roads to get to where they were going. Except there weren't any. That was the great joke. Pioneers found game trails, nothing more than a break in the brambles, and followed it. Sometimes there were wider paths, made by generations of Indians on the hunt. Sometimes it was an explorer moving from point to point, writing down what they observed as they made their way inland or overland. Brill knew how they must have felt. Going was slow, but steady. He forged a path that ran parallel to the power lines and slipped the tight noose set up to find him. Lucky, he thought. One craned neck would have made a world of difference. Then his luck ran out. There was a ditch on the side of a raised road, a 2-lane piece of blacktop that crossed under the power lines and kept going. He could see it curving away a half-mile further down and wondered if it meant the town was close by. The ditch had running water that danced and crackled over rocks put there to keep the earth from washing away. He slipped over the edge of the ditch, ready to climb up the other side, and didn't notice the carved-out section under a lip of earth. The stream must have flooded in 100 rainy days, pushed the soft dirt out of the way under the shelf. It created a cave of sorts, big enough for a small bear to call home for hibernation. It wasn't a bear that slipped out after him though. A mud-covered man with a bushy beard that overflowed to his chest, and long locks held back from his face with a solid original-issue green bandana. He was big, bigger than Brill, in BDUs and a packed vest, long rifle strapped to his chest. Brill couldn't see the man's eyes. They were hidden by oversized sunglasses. Echo 1, the man tapped his throat to click the mic. Got him. Brill raised his hands and turned around slow. His captor's lips pursed in confusion. You don't look like Alibaba. He aimed the rifle at Brill. He didn't have a regulation look, even if he wore the specs, thought Brill. He had run up against a couple of mercs over in Angola, former military who were professional soldiers. The man who captured him looked like that. Special forces or mercenary. Same choice. Congratulations, Brill smiled. You aced the op. Op? The raised eyebrow shifted the bandana. I'm Walters, Brill kept smiling. CIA Operations Group. We brought you guys in to test some weaknesses in our lineup. The man shook his head. No good, Chief. I ain't buying what you're selling. You think I came through the woods? Brill pointed to the power lines. I got dropped off up there and was walking the perimeter. The Rangers in there have a tight circle. I don't think that guy's getting out. The rifle never wavered as the man took a step closer. Told you, I ain't buying. Brill moved his hand to the web on his shoulder. I'm going to take off these weapons and put them down, he said. Don't get nervous. The bearded man licked his lips and nodded. Brill slipped a sling up with each hand, moving slow. He held them out to the side and lowered them to the ground in a squat. He lay the straps out in wide circles from the rifle, and shifted forward on his knees, shoulders slumped into feet. Just as fast, he whipped up a rock straight at his captor's head. The man ducked and fired off a shot. It pinged into the earth next to Brill's thigh and showered him with dirt. The soldier adjusted his aim just as a second rock plowed into his eyes and knocked his head back. Then Brill was on him, one hand shoving the rifle to the side, The other delivered a fast punch to his throat. The man gagged, and tried to roll Brill off, but he grabbed another fist-sized rock and slammed it against the side of his head. It bought enough time to yank the rifle away and toss a pistol further up the ditch. He rolled the man over on his stomach and divested a set of flex cuffs from his belt. A quick zip locked his wrists together. Brill debated hitting him again, or just shooting him, but a flash of light off a glass caught his eye. A car was coming from the direction of town. "Never leave an enemy alive at your back," Simon told him. But this was just another guy doing his job. If he wanted Brill dead, he could have shot him in the back of the head from the safety of the cave. He didn't, which meant orders were to take him alive. Brill watched the car for 2 seconds. It was local PD, a black and white moving at the speed limit. On patrol, he thought, but not for him. His hunters wouldn't have brought in the police. Not yet. They would try to contain it. More were coming though. The radio call from Echo 1 would be drawing them in. Which meant he needed to move fast. He dragged the soldier into the cave to hide him, leapt across the water and lumbered up the tall roadside of the ditch as the cop car approached. Brill waved him down and stood back as the cruiser came to a stop and the window rolled down. "Problem? I got lost," Brill said. "I was hiking in the woods and," he shrugged. "Where did you park?" "I didn't know there were trails in there." "I cut across the trails," Brill answered. "I was trying to take a shortcut back to town." The cop steadied him for a moment, then put the car in park. He stepped out, opened the back door and ushered Brill inside. "I can't let you sit up front." "No problem." Brill bent over and shuffled like he was hay-suited. "What happened to your head?" the cop asked as he settled in the back seat. "Walked right into a branch," Brill told him. "Bled pretty bad." Officer Parks, according to his nameplate, closed the door and got in behind the wheel. He pulled a half U-turn, reversed and finished it off to go back the way he came. "You need to get that looked at?" "I'll be fine," said Brill. "It looks worse than it is." The cop nodded and stared at him in the rearview mirror. "So," he asked, "where did you park?" Brill had no idea. Chapter 7. "In town," Brill answered. They drove in silence to the curve in the road. Brill wanted to look back over his shoulder, to see if other soldiers were moving out of the woods. Check if a helo was zeroing in on the police cruiser and starting to give chase. But any move like that would arouse suspicion. So he sat in the back seat, hands on his legs, right arm slightly higher because of the bag he still carried. "I've been lost before," said Officer Park. Both in the literal and figurative sense. Brill couldn't remember if cops gave rides anymore. When he was a kid, it wasn't a problem. Part of protecting and serving meant knowing the neighborhood, going the extra mile. Small-town cops gave rides to stranded motorists or people on the edge of trouble all the time. Not causing trouble, but on the receiving end. Now though? He'd been out of the country for too long, and the police looked more militarized than when he grew up. This one had an AR-15 strapped to a lock on the dash, instead of a shotgun. A Kevlar vest on under his uniform that made him as thick as a fire hydrant. "I was scared until I found the road," Brill played the part. "Yeah, been there," Park agreed. "I haven't eaten all day," Brill said. "If you could just drop me at a restaurant in town, I can walk to my car." "Sounds good," Park agreed. He gripped the wheel with one hand, watched the road and kept an eye on Brill at the same time. It was the movement of his eyes, like a roving pattern. Road. Mirror. Road. Mirror. Brill sat in the back and listened to the chatter on the radio, keyed up to hear suspect descriptions or bolos. No one said be on the lookout for him, though. Officer Park drove through the edge of town that blended in with the woods. It appeared in the middle of a clearing like a fairy circle after a thunderstorm, just popped up in the middle of nothing. Brill could see a well-kept wooden welcome sign that advised him he was in Baker, population 312. Where Baker was, he didn't know. There were 24 streets laid out in a grid pattern, and Park chose the main drag. They passed homes that were occupied and some abandoned, all manner of type with varying styles of architecture. Built at different times, thought Brill, and added as needs must based on the style of the day. The commercial area was closer to the center of town. Simple block buildings surrounding a few streets of old brick structures. Park pulled into a 4-store strip mall and parked near a diner on the end. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I could just take you to your car, save you some more time on your feet." Brill told him he was good and waited to be let out. He stood by the glass door next to a whiteboard advertising the blue plate special of the day and waved as Park pulled back onto the road and accelerated back toward the edge of town. He waited until the cruiser was out of sight, then moved around the side into the back of the building. It was smarter to keep moving. Smarter still to find a car and get gone altogether, But boosting a car from a small town would present a new set of problems. First would be to find one that wouldn't be missed. Second would be the roads out of there. A stolen car would go out on the radio and present too many opportunities to get pulled over. The net would be closing soon, as one side of the circle reached the other, and she would realize Brill slipped loose. If she was smart, she would call for the right kind of help then. Park would check in and tell them he dropped Brill off at the diner. And the search would start from there. He figured he had 90 minutes. An hour would be better. An hour's head start in any direction would put him that much closer to finding a big city. A big city meant anonymity. Getting lost there would be easy. He just had to make it first. Brill passed a bus station and considered it. But when the call went out, they would pull over buses or check with drivers. Too easy to find. Besides, he didn't have any money. Chapter 8. He started walking. He courted the blocks, going mostly by feel. Looking for a certain kind of place. He would know it by feeling. Small towns where he grew up had them in the rougher part of town, and every town had the other side of the tracks. Even when there were no tracks. It took 15 minutes before he saw the sign. Pawn shop. And he was in luck, because the tiny little store set back on the far side of a parking lot had bikes up front, and a scooter and 3 dirty banged-up cars with for sale signs in the windows. Brill went inside and haggled and traded with the bald-round proprietor, 2 military-issue .45s, plus 2 knives for the title and keys to one of the cars and a screwdriver with a head that changed from flat to Phillips. It took 20 minutes and Brill wasn't even out of the door when the guys started filing serial numbers and cleaning the pieces. Brill didn't ask about Baker, didn't ask for directions, just got in an old 4-door sedan with white paint gone gray with age and dirt. It started after a few hesitant clicks and chugged like an asthmatic climbing Kilimanjaro. It would do, he thought. Needs must. He rolled out of the parking lot and began looking. Every town had office buildings, and this was the part he didn't like. He found a parked car, and edged up behind it to create a screen with his new wheels. Then he used the screwdriver to transfer the plates to the new car and rolled away. It wouldn't pass scrutiny, and the owner would report them missing when they got off work or the next day. Which bought him time. He headed south on the main drag, still unsure where Baker was or where he was going. He slipped through the edge of town into more deep woods and kept rolling. The bald tires ate the miles, the large car swaying in a hypnotic undulation. Brill rooted in the pack next to him, pulled out one of the emergency rations and ate as he drove. The taste was as bland as the car. A lot of salt, presumably to replace a lot of sweat for a person in the desert. Or on the run. MREs weren't made for dinner parties. He dug out the first aid kit, opened it on his lap and checked for painkillers for his head. He dry swallowed 4 and used 3 alcohol swabs to clean the crusty wound. It didn't look as bad as he thought as he checked it in the smoky mirror. The road did what roads do and interested a 4-lane highway. There was a green sign with white letters indicating places he didn't know and had never heard of, but the highway was divided and he pulled across to go east. East was the ocean. He glanced at the gas gauge. He had half a tank. It was time to plan again. The drive made him think of the blues. It was the hum-thrum of the bald tires on the rumbly blacktop, the spin and thump of movement. There was a beat to it, chugging in time with the engine of the car. Brill figured bluesmen of old, skinny black guys with big hands and used guitars would sit on front porches and listen to trains go by to pick their notes. His mind drifted to the situation, keeping it vague on purpose. He didn't dwell on one thing, just tried to keep it soft and fuzzy in his mind. Keep it blunt and obtuse. Sometimes he could come at the problem from another angle like that. Approach it downwind, sneak up on it and find a solution that worked. He realized he was trying to talk himself out of it. Killing a man was something that had to be done, and when it came time to do it in the past, he had pulled the trigger and never lost a night's sleep about it. He figured that was his job. Killing bad men. Some of those bad men were rebels, fathers with families they were trying to protect. Some were just enemies of whoever paid his boss, and he did as he was told. Shelby though, he couldn't figure. Not yet. Was he a bad man doing bad things? Or was he a patriot, misguided in his attempt to keep his country safe? A lot of good old boys he grew up with had that attitude. It was okay to do bad things to non-Americans, so long as the result was good. He moved his eyes in a triangle. Road ahead. Road behind. The woods beside him. Just checking. Just to be safe. So far, so good. He passed a green sign with white letters that told him it was 48 miles to the next city. He kept going. Chapter 9. The woods began to thin out. The steady solid tree line started being interrupted by homes. Then buildings. He wasn't in town yet, not the big one at least. The satellite townships that popped up around larger cities. Not suburbs. These were here first, 100 years ago when people liked space. Good fences made good neighbors, but 10 miles was much better. Like villages in Africa. They popped up where they needed to be. A wide spot on the trail, a place to rest the horses, restock the wagons, build a mill. Someone built a house. Then another. The town 10 miles away grew. Maybe an industry showed up after World War II and drew in a bunch of farm kids looking for life in the big city. Big compared to the township. Larger than the village. The town expanded out. He could see it as he drove, like watching the expansion in reverse at 50 miles per hour. The townships had older homes, older buildings, cause no one was moving there anymore and gentrification skipped it over. The buildings weren't cool enough to rehabilitate, weren't architecturally diverse enough to bother saving. They were repurposed, reused or left to rot. Then the town line. Newer buildings, simple block construction covered with facade. Then older as he kept going. The city wasn't huge. But cities have a rhythm of their own, an ebb and flow, especially in the South. It didn't matter what part of the world they were in, cities were the same, because people were the same. There were places people wanted to live, and places where people lived who had no choice. He aimed for those places. Followed the speed limit, full stop at every stop sign. Wore his seatbelt. No reason to attract any attention. Brill was looking for a certain kind of place. Boarded up houses were a good sign. Trash in the yard, cars up on cinder blocks. The certain kind of places would attract a certain kind of people. Addicts. Every city in every country in every world had them. And addicts meant dealers. It wasn't a socio-economic problem to Brill. There were rich addicts as well as poor, but the dealers who catered to rich clientele tended to do it in places that were harder to get to. Nightclubs. Boardrooms, or the bathrooms in large office buildings. Nicer homes and gated communities. Not ideal for what he wanted. He spied it on the 9th turn. A skinny guy with no teeth stumbling like a zombie on the sidewalk. A man with a purpose. One arm locked to his side, the other swinging wide. Brill slowed down and followed him for 3 blocks. The destination was ahead. He could see it when the man sped up. Getting closer to what he wanted got him excited, put a little pep in his step. He lurched faster. Brains, thought Brill. Must eat brains. He didn't know if brains were up for offer. Street dealers were smart. They had to be. But if they were really smart, they would be doing white-collar crime and making millions instead of slinging whatever on a street corner to make thousands. Penny wise. Pound foolish. The kid sold him. The addict shambled up to dirty urchin in a white tank top gone dingy, food stains and grime making it gray on his black skin. He straddled a bicycle with 2 flat tires on the corner of the street below a block of dilapidated homes. The addict dug around in his grungy jeans pockets and passed over a couple of crumpled bills to the kid. He dropped the bike and raced to the 3rd house on the block, bounded up the steps and knocked on the door. The top half opened, like a homemade Dutch door, and a slender ebony hand took the money and passed a tiny baggie out to the boy. Then he skipped down the steps and completed the trade. The boy lifted the bike, straddled it again and glared at the junkie as he hobbled away. Just as quick, his eyes locked on the sedan and at Brill. The small head tilted in concentration, working to determine if he was a threat or a customer. Brill waved as he drove past to add to the confusion and turned back toward a better part of town. This kid probably never saw a tourist before. Nobody toured this neighborhood. Hell, it could barely be called living. Brill pulled over to the side of the road in front of an empty house and checked his resources. An unknown number of enemy behind the door of the home. No access through the windows to spy or make an entrance. Front door was sawed in half, so kicking it in would be a problem. The top part might stay in place, which would expose his legs to return fire. Or the bottom part would go and expose him up top. The kid would act as an early warning system. Brill knew he was there to decoy the cops, who were smart enough to know what he was doing, but he might have more than one purpose. At least he wasn't armed, Brill thought. Nowhere to hide a gun. Unless he had one stashed under the thin wooden steps or in the grass. He shook his head. One variable he couldn't control. One among many. He almost drove away then, looking for an easier way. A quick glance at the red needle just over empty made him reconsider. He had no money. He needed money. The decision was made for him. He just wished he had a couple of those SOG guys to back up his play. They could breach in multiple points, subdue resistance with extreme prejudice. Easy. Going in hard, alone, wouldn't be. Brill snorted and cranked the car in gear. Going in would be a nightmare. But what if he could get them to come out? Chapter 10. Brill turned left and pulled up to the curb in front of the house the little kid on the corner had run up to. The kid watched him, mouth hanging open. He dropped his bike and sprinted away. This kind of neighborhood, a white guy stopping on the street and not looking to score was a cop. Plain and simple. Even if he was in a beat-up old crappy car. Brill liked the binary thinking of it. A simple choice. Cop or no cop. From the kid's perspective at least. Anyone looking out from the house would see the same at first. White guy. White car. Out of place. But no SWAT team. No flashing lights, no spill of Kevlar-covered police from the back of anywhere, advancing on the drug house with military-issue rifles tucked to shoulders. Just a guy. Sitting in a car. The simplicity of it was maddening. What did that guy want? What was he doing there? And then, after some debate, after the lack of movement dragged on for a few minutes, a realization. The guy, whoever he was costing them money. Because a beat-up white sedan with a white guy waiting in the front seat might not be a cop car, but why take the chance? Customers would stumble to the corner, look for the kid, look for the set-up way to do the thing, and stare in fuzzy confusion at the discarded bike with 2 flat tires. Their bloodshot eyes would stare at the house, then the car and move on. A survival instinct of sorts. Brill waited. After the third would-be customer tripped over the curb as they stumbled away, the top half of the door opened. He couldn't see inside. Couldn't see anyone looking out at him, couldn't hear anyone screaming for him to get the hell out of there. So he waited. 2 more lost transactions lurched across the street in search of easier pickings and the bottom half opened it. It folded in, not quite matched with the top half, which messed with the depth perception and the way the light entered the dark entryway. Then a man stepped out. He was tall and skinny, long ropey muscles on display in a skin-tight tank top. Crisp iron blue jeans sagged low, belt holding them to the top of his thighs, so that a colorful pair of boxer briefs were visible between the bright white shirt and dark denim. One hand held the belt buckle, and the other held a pistol, not quite aimed at Brill. Just waving in the air, motioning him to move along. Brill studied the thin face a moment. Tight cornrows framed it, diamond-studded earrings flashed on his ears. He waited. The waving got more frantic, as the man stepped on the porch and aimed the gun. He held it sideways, more a pose than an actual threat to shoot, and still wiggled it to indicate for Brill to get gone. When he didn't, the man stepped off the porch, and crossed the yard. The way his pants were slung, it was a wonder he could walk, Brill thought. Waddled, more like it. The pistol tapped on the glass. Brill rolled it down and let the gun come in toward his head. "You ain't hear me?" the man asked. "I said get gone." The gun kept coming toward his head. Brill jammed his hand up from where it was waiting and snatched the bony wrist. He shoved the arm up into the frame of the car, and cracked it against the top of the door. The man howled as Brill hauled the arm across his chest and smashed the man's face into the top of the car. He let go of the wrist, twisted the gun backwards and snapped a finger as he took it away. The man screamed. Brill slammed the door open into him and sent him stumbling backwards. He jumped out of the car, grabbed the injured arm and spun the man around with it tucked up nice and neat between his shoulder blades. He forced him forward, keeping his body between Brill and the door, pistol aimed at the dark opening. The man tripped on the first step and almost went down. Brill heard a buzz whiz by his ear, and the bang of a pistol from inside at almost the same time. He yanked the man higher, ducked behind him, and squeezed 3 rounds down the hallway. They made the porch and Brill pushed the man in front of him. The inside of the house smelled. It was decay and rot, body sweat and the cloying funk of weed, and hint of gunpowder. The man screamed for help. Brill clocked him across the back of the head, ducked and waited in a crouch behind the slouched body against the wall. He didn't wait long. The silence created curiosity, and a head peeked out in the hall from a room at the far end. Brill sent a round through the plaster next to the doorframe and watched the body sprawl onto the discolored linoleum. He gave his opponent an idea. Shooting the shooter through the plaster made them realize they could do the same. They sent 5 rounds at chest level in the hall from the first room on the right. Brill and his prisoner were on the wall, dust and plaster snowing on them as it fell. He let it go quiet a moment, let the shooter wonder if he got him. Brill stepped over the prisoner, stepped around the doorframe and shot the man in the corner. There was a television with a frozen first-person shooter game on it, 3 drinks on the coffee table. He figured 3 guys. The table was covered with little packets of drugs, 2 more grimy pistols and a set of car keys. 3 camp chairs were arrayed in front of the television, controller wires leading to 2 of them. And cash. Stacks of bills by denomination on the coffee table bracketed by an ashtray overflowing with thin cigars and blunts, and a large can of cheap beer. Brill swiped the cash and pistols, and the car keys. He checked the dead man's pockets and took a thick wad of notes from him, plus his pistol. He stepped into the hallway as his prisoner stirred. Brill shot him twice and cleaned his pockets, then relieved the third dead man of $200 and his weapon. He could hear sirens getting louder and wondered where the car would be parked. He stepped through the kitchen, lifted the key fob and pressed the unlock button. A shiny black sports car beeped in a carport in the backyard. He double-checked to make sure the way was clear, then hurried to the car. It fired up with a satisfying rumble. He pulled around the side of the house and paused at the white sedan to retrieve his bag. Then he hopped in the car and pulled away, going the speed limit. No faster. No slower. He checked the mirror and saw the corner kid sprint inside the house and run out with his hands full of tiny plastic packets. Brill guessed he just gave that kid a promotion and kept driving. Chapter 11. He drove north for an hour and a half. It put him on the outskirts of D.C. by way of two-lane highways that meandered through the countryside. He picked a two-story hotel, just a block structure off the side of the road with a sign that promised single rooms for $34.99. It was across the street from a large truck stop gas station, the kind of place that saw 1,000 big rigs a day, and a ton of travelers. He parked the car, left the window down and keys in the ignition. It would have been better to park it in the city, but he couldn't chance anyone paying attention to the news or if the cops connected the car to the drug house. He would have set it on fire, if he had time. A burned-out shell would take more time to investigate. Still, leaving the car in front of the station was almost an invitation for someone to take it. He kept his head low, watching the ground as he got out and left it, just in case there were cameras. The clerk behind the hotel desk was eating a sandwich with his feet up behind the counter as Brill came in. "Vacancy?" Brill asked. The guy brushed crumbs off his oversized gut and stood up while chomping the big bite in his mouth. He set a card on the countertop and a pencil and tapped it. Brill filled out a fake name, and slid 2 dirty $20 bills back to the man. "You forgot to fill out your plates, man." Walking? Around here? Nobody walks around here," the guy smacked as he cleaned his teeth with his tongue. Brill pointed over his shoulder. "I've got a Peterbilt parked over there," he said. "Nothing to take up space here." The clerk nodded and slid a key on a plastic ring back to him. "Second floor," he said. "Third from last." Brill walked up the stairs and let himself into the room. The decor was early modern grunge. Everything felt like it was covered with a film of dirt, held in place by crusty cleaning fluid. A questionable spread on the lumpy bed, flat pillows and a television set scarred with cigarette burns occupied most of the space. Brill locked the deadbolt behind him and put the chain in place. The bathroom wasn't much better. Yellow tub, yellow tile, yellow toilet, all once white but lost to age and lazy cleaning. Brill set the bag on the dresser next to the television set and sat on the end of the bed for a moment, just to breath. He was tired. Sore. Adrenaline had coursed through his system for most of the day, but now that he was still, it was wearing off. He could feel the aches of being hit, of running, hiding. The stress of it was a physical thing. He needed food and sleep and quiet. But he didn't have food and didn't want to go out yet. Better to lay low and let the dust settle. He stripped off his shoes, pants and shirt, but kept his socks on as he walked to the bathroom and slid them off as he stepped under the weak drizzle of water from the shower head. It was hot, he could say that much. He washed off the dirt and grime and sweat, letting it swirl down the drain. He used the shampoo on his hair, and the soap on his body and stayed under the spurts until the temperature started to go colder. He got out and used a paper-thin towel to dry off, his skin pink from the heat. He used the towel to bridge the carpet from the tile to the bed and slid under the covers. Brill took 3 breaths in and out to still his mind, closed his eyes and slept. Chapter 12. He got away. You let him escape. Shelby sat back in the executive leather chair behind his oversized desk. It was set sideways in the room, so he could turn one way and stare at DC through the floor-to-ceiling windows on one side, or swivel the other to the double computer monitors that half hid him from view. He could hear the tension in the voice on the other end of the speakerphone. "I underestimated him. This is the point in the conversation where I say, 'I told you to be careful.'" The rustle of cloth on the phone made him think she was nodding her head. "Are you agreeing with me?" "I am." "And what's the solution?" "We've lost him." Shelby sighed and rubbed his face with one hand. The other patted a file folder on his desktop stamped with one word. "Shadowboxer." "Did you bring in the Rangers?" "We did." "And he slipped the news?" "He did." "Are you asking for my help?" There was silence on the other end of the box for several moments. Shelby let it stretch you. He found that people who were uncomfortable with silence rushed to fill it. It was a tactic he used often against his fellow senators, just staring at them with pursed lips to see how they would fill the void. "Yes," she answered. He smiled. She lasted longer than a lot of the most powerful men in the country. Grab a still from the security feeds and put it on the news. APB him as a cop killer. Locals hate when a boy in blue gets gunned down. And they can be your eyes on the ground. Do you know where he might go? Shelby stared through the window at the expansive skyline. White marble buildings gleamed in the sunlight, but he could see a shelf cloud formation looming dark in the distance. He tapped the file with the tip of his finger. "Home," he answered. "He's going home." "There are a lot of ways to get there," she started to say. "His home," Shelby corrected. "Do we have assets in South Africa? I can get some. Find the girl. Bring her here. He'll come for her. How do we let him know we have her? You know what a good cop killer needs? An accomplice. He comes back to me when I get him." Shelby snorted. "That's a bold request. Assuming a local doesn't gun him down, we want the chance to teach him a lesson. You've done so well, so far. Senator," she said. "You told me not to underestimate him. I won't make that mistake again." Shelby reached for the disconnect button. "Most people who make that mistake don't get second chances," he said into the phone. "He must like you if he let you live." He clicked off and lifted the file as he turned to the window. "Brad," he called out. The door behind him whisked open into the wall. "Senator? Can you call up some of the boys and give us some extra guards around here? Do you expect trouble, sir?" Shelby shook his head as he thumbed through the file. There were training logs, after-action reports and a single black and white picture of Brill in his South African recce uniform. "Right now, I don't see a way to avoid it." Chapter 13. He snapped awake and sat up in the bed. The room was dark and smelled of mildew and trapped moisture, but sunlight framed the edges of the curtain. Brill slid into his clothes from the days before and checked his gear as he planned out his next move. Food first, then movement. The problem was distance. He could hike 20 kilometers in a day under a 60-pound ruck, but in the jungle, there was always a base to return back to. Here, walking was considered out of the norm, and out of the norm meant a second look. And there was no base of operations. He felt listless for a moment and took a deep breath. Simon taught him how to solve problems. Don't focus on the big picture. What was the next step? What was simple? Easy? Food. He loaded up and left the key on the dresser as he stepped out into the sunlight after a quick double-check through the peephole in the curtains. The parking lot was empty, but the truck stop across the street was a hive of activity. Large rigs belched black smoke as they rumbled from the lot and gained speed. He moved to the end of the exterior corridor, studying the scene in front of him, eyes flicking from one thing to the next as he searched for anything out of place. The sports car was still there, so he decided to forego the station across the street. He focused on direction instead. The big rigs were headed for the highway access roads, and he wondered if he could hitch a ride. It didn't seem like a great place for it. The trucks would be turning into curves and trying to build up to highway speed on the short ramps to merge into traffic. The drivers would be reluctant to stop since they had just left the fuel station. Some cars were mixed in, but the problem of access was the same. A car would be accelerating down the ramp toward the merge lane, and have to pull over to pick him up, which shortened the distance for them to get back up to speed again. He figured drivers wouldn't want to do it, unless he had time to wait, and he didn't have time. Someone would notice the sports car soon. A good Samaritan would call it in, and the cops would come to investigate. They might even be on their way now. The clerk stepped out of the office and glared at him. "Wait right there," the man barked. He was taller than Brill by an inch, twice as wide, with a hairline and beer gut both succumbing to gravity. One shaky hand held a large revolver pointed at him. "Don't move," he added. Brill held up his hands as he took 2 more steps closer and stopped. The man stepped forward, then back again, like rocking in place. It made his hand shake even more, as he looked around and kept glancing over his shoulder at the door behind him. "Stay right there," he said, still frozen. "Didn't quite think this through?" Brill asked. "You shot a cop," the man's tongue darted in and out, slathered his thick lips with spittle. "You have me mixed up with someone else," Brill said. "You're on the news," the clerk stuttered. "I saw your picture." "Reward?" Brill asked. The man glanced back over his shoulder as a room door between them opened and a woman stepped out. She was as large as the office clerk, bathed in a voluminous dress and a floral pattern, an unlit cigarette hanging from her lips. She ducked her head and flicked a lighter, paying zero attention to the world she stepped into, but her size blocked the corridor walkway and the path of any bullet the clerk might send his way. Brill lunged, planted both hands into her meaty shoulder and sent her pinwheeling into the clerk. He jerked the gun out of the way, and didn't pull the trigger as she crashed into him, and both of them tumbled to the concrete in an avalanche of curses and flesh. Brill vaulted over them, bent on the other side, and wrenched the revolver from the clerk's hand. He pounded past the office door and almost ducked in to search for car keys, but he didn't know if the clerk called the cops before he tried to play hero. Which meant 2 chances for the police to be on their way, and if his face was on the news as a cop killer, they wouldn't be in the mood to ask questions. At least not until they had shot a couple of times first. He had to disappear, and hitching a ride wasn't going to do it. She hung up her cell phone and threw it on the dashboard of her SUV. "Son of a bitch," she muttered to the empty passenger seat. Bringing in outside help pissed her off. Rangers were bad, but SOG was worse. And now civilian authorities. Shelby was going to demote her. Hell, she would be lucky if he didn't kill her. She considered going rogue for a moment, just ghosting like the man she was hunting for did. She had a couple of accounts with money, a few IDs she could hide under. Contacts overseas could set her up as a nice used bookstore owner in Prague or Sweden. She gave it a moment of serious thought. It would be easy to drive to the airport, hop a plane. All it would take would be 2 small stops first, to grab a go bag with her gear and some cosmetics to change her hair. Thinking about it made her run her fingers through it. Nope. Running wasn't an option. It wasn't in her nature to hide. The man she was hunting liked to hide. She just had to think about where so she could find him. Her first call had been to dispatch to release his information to the police and label him a cop killer. Her second call was to an extraction team to locate and render the girl to the States. That took time, and she wondered what to do with the time. She had watched Brill on tape for hours. She felt like it would help her get to know him. She memorized the contours of his plain face, his placid demeanor. She studied his black eyes, like bottomless wells that she now knew hid a demon. He was an evil man, she decided. Anyone who could inflict so much damage and pain without a hint of emotion had to be broken. She had Delta operators on her team who cried like babies for the men they had killed. Not during a fight, because they were royal badasses who excelled in delivering just punishment to the enemies of the state. But after, when the adrenaline wore off, they were men who experienced some level of emotion for the actions they were asked to do. Not him. Not once. She wondered what was wrong with him. Psychotic, to be sure. If Shelby hadn't pulled him into an operation when he was a kid, if he hadn't gone into the South African military not long after, she wouldn't be the one hunting him. She was sure of that. He would be stalked by the FBI as a serial killer. He had the eyes for it. Dead. Black. Bottomless. She shivered in her seat and wondered where he would go next. They would take the girl to D.C. The instructions were to land her at McNair and take her to a warehouse. Now she had to decide how to leak the information so he would hear it. They could set a trap for him. A trap meant she wouldn't have to do the hunting. He would just come to her. She dropped the SUV in gear and pulled onto the road. D.C. was an hour and a half away. Longer if there was traffic. Plenty of time to plan the perfect trap to capture their prey. Chapter 14. Brill ran around the side of the hotel and to the back of the structure. He wasn't sure where the wood next to the road would go, but sprinted through the pines. He was still sore from the prior day's action, and hungry, but the movement was familiar and the rushing of his blood soon warmed up his muscles. He angled away from the road and wished he had a map. He could have paralleled the highway, but no roads run straight and true. They weave and bob, twist and turn depending on property rights and natural obstructions. He could run true north for 20 miles before hitting a road if they all were straight. But he didn't. He ran through a thin line of trees that bordered a low fence next to the divided highway within 2 miles. Not far enough. He stood behind the pines and glared. He could adjust and keep running in the trees, but he might have a better solution. The highway was a vast open space almost 60 yards wide. A fence just like the one in front of him mirrored the far side. The roadside was a raised incline up to a wide shoulder and 2 lanes full of whizzing autos. A median spread 15 of the 60 yards, with a 3-strand wire cable fence in the middle. Then 2 more lanes of traffic, another shoulder and the fence. All that stood between him and train tracks. Tracks that went north. The direction he wanted to go. Running across a busy highway was stupid. He could see a couple of stiff carcasses of roadkill that had tried it and lost. Armadillo and raccoon, both belly up, arms raised to the morning sky. He could make the run, no problem. If he could wait for a break in traffic. There was always enough space, especially if he moved fast. It was the waiting to move that was the problem. He would have to do it twice, which meant prolonged exposure, plus the chance that some hero in the making would remember him from the news and want to make a name for themselves. A lot of risk. But not too much to stop him. The tracks on the other side beckoned, a promise of fast and steady transportation that would carry him closer to his destination. A freight train too, which meant he wouldn't have to bother with people. He hopped the fence and darted up the incline. Cars sped past, faces just blurs behind sun-streaked windows. He kept his head ducked low, tilted so he could gauge a break in the flow of traffic. Brill spied it and ran fast. There was plenty of room. Not even a contest. But somebody honked anyway. Just more attention being directed toward him. He raced across the median, leapt the fence and waited again. The traffic in this direction was heavier. Harder to find a break. People were speeding to work. He wondered why they were in such a hurry, then snorted because he was in a hurry too. Not for work, just to get across. Then he saw the train. A freight train, like he thought. Rust-colored cars hauled by double locomotives that belched black smoke from diesel engines. The timing was perfect. If he could make it across. He wasn't sure when another train would run. It didn't matter, cause he planned to walk the tracks until one showed up, but the train chugging along the tracks now was like a gift horse. If he could make it across. He waited. He watched the traffic. A big rig pulled onto the ramp further up the road. He could see the ripple in traffic as cars pulled over and away. He could see swirling lights on the side of the rig, then they disappeared behind it. The ripple disrupted the traffic pattern. Blue lights made drivers slow down, and the rig tried to build up speed. Human nature. A rolling roadblock for just a moment. Just a minute. It opened up a hole. Brill darted across. This time, no one honked. He hit the decline beside the shoulder and skidded down. Looked back to see the cop pass the big rig, the trailer blocking the view. Then he was up and over the fence and the train was passing him. It roared and shook the earth as it chugged past. He jogged beside it, searching. He could see the end of the train, just one more boxcar. No caboose. Those were from another age. Another time. Now the relief just drove out to meet the engineers at shift change. He timed his jump and latched onto a ladder as he was in mid-air. It yanked him along and he fumbled up the rungs to the top of the car. He lay flat and waited. Waited to see if someone spied him, if the train would slow or even stop. But it kept going. Brill crawled along the top, 3 cars up to an open-air flat car. There were large shapes under dingy tarps. He climbed down and onto the flat car, then huddled next to a tarp, hidden from almost all but the most discerning prying eyes as he rode north. His stomach grumbled a rumble. Later, he muttered to himself and huddled lower in his little hidey hole on the train car. Chapter 15. Shelby picked up the phone on the first ring. He recognized the number on the display, though it wasn't one that called him often. Once, he recalled. When there was a threat on the president's life. Yes? He answered. We found something interesting. Shelby took a breath. Getting the old boy elected was the first step and a hard one. Hell, getting anyone into the Oval Office these days was a compromise in ethics and in some cases humanity. Keeping him alive was a whole other ballgame, especially when he liked to impress pretty young things by bringing them in through back doors. It's not him, the voice said. Start talking 007. That's Mr. Zero to you. You have more time than I do, Shelby said. Does saving the world not keep you busy enough? You want me to get to the point? This time, someone is after you? That made him sit up in his seat. He glanced through the windows to the cityscape beyond as if he could see who the voice on the phone was talking about. Do you have eyes on? He's a squirrely son of a bitch. Where did he go? That's why I called you. We don't know. The entire intelligence apparatus of the CIA and you lost a potential assassin in the wind? Yeah, the voice huffed out a laugh. Consider yourself warned. Is that going to be enough? I've got a couple of assets pulling babysitting duty. Shelby nodded, though the man on the other end couldn't see it. Are you nodding? Are you watching me now? Nah, just know how you think? I doubt it. Right now, you're gonna hang up with me and get your own security on the line. Double down. Do you suggest an alternative? The way I figure, you know who the squirrely guy is. I have an idea. One of yours gone rogue? A variation of that. It was the voice on the phone's turn to breath. What are you thinking? Shelby asked. Give me 6 weeks and you won't recognize him. We tried. Mad Dog? Our determination was that there was only one outcome. Inevitable? He's too dangerous to control, said Shelby. 6 weeks, said the voice again. If you can, Shelby agreed. And if he doesn't kill me first. We'll work on the first part. You take care of the second. How good are your sitters? Normally, I'd say good enough, but... He got away. He got away, the voice agreed. Shelby listened as the phone clicked shut. He stared through the window for a few moments more, then tapped a button on speed dial. "He's here," he said when the phone was answered. He hung up and hoped it was enough. Chapter 16. The conclusion was inevitable. It was preordained or written in the stars. It was an African proverb about the wind. Brill didn't imagine himself an avenging angel. He had done too much to be an angel. Killed. Maimed. Destroyed. And now he planned to kill again. Not angelic thoughts, he told himself as he stared at the two men in the black sedan. They were good. Attentive. Their heads were on a swivel. They were parked at an angle to see the front and back of the building and the entrance to the parking garage. Brill knew they were G-men when a traffic cop puttered up in an electric three-wheeled cart with a plastic wind cover and offered to write them a ticket. They declined by showing leather wallets. He couldn't see the ID. Couldn't see if there were badges inside. But he could see the cop's attitude change. A cross between pissed off and deference. She glanced up at the building they were parked in front of and back at them before getting inside her little plastic cocoon to stalk easier pastures. She drove past Brill and ignored him. Just like the men in the car. Just like everyone else. He wore layers of clothes, dirty, grungy, rooted from several spots and added as he walked downtown from the train tracks. The homeless shut items like snakeskins, dropping shirts and jackets and blankets on random corners or under overpasses as they saw fit. He didn't know why, just that it was a universal action. Maybe it was the cheap hooch or the mental illness, or the heat. Maybe they wore clothes for a couple of days and then got more from donation boxes or charities. It didn't matter to him. He suspected what he would find along the way and that expectation was met. Like the men in the car when they looked at him. The two men in the car were good. Only their heads moved in the past half hour, and even then, it was hard to detect. They watched the entrance to the building and the parking garage at the same time, both on the street-facing front. The other three sides were secure walls of thick concrete up to the third floor. No easy way to access from there. Brill huddled under a stinking old army blanket on a piece of cardboard in front of the next building up. He was covered in layers of grimy clothes, head hidden under a ratty toboggan and grease-streaked ball cap. No one paid attention to the homeless guy on the corner. He held a handwritten cardboard sign with the words "Please help" and "God bless" scratched in ink. So far, no one had, but he didn't care. All just part of the cover. He didn't know who they were with. One agency or the other. He wondered why they were watching Shelby's office. Did the senator reach out for additional help or was this just something he stumbled across? Secret squirrel stuff had never been his specialty, though Simon insisted that everyone in his company had a basic understanding of tradecraft. Very basic, thought Brill. There were two kinds of people no one paid attention to. The homeless and joggers. They expected a homeless guy sitting lethargic on a slip of cardboard, drunk or tired against the side of a building. That's what they saw. Brill covered and lolling, lethargic. They were too far away to see. His eyes never stayed still. Time passed. Morning shifted to lunch and one of the men went to a street vendor 2 blocks up. Brill didn't move. He watched a stream of black suits and conservative skits exit the building and disperse to lunch counters around downtown. One of the women bent down as she passed him and handed him a crisp dollar bill. "Bless you," Brill slurred and mumbled and kept his head ducked inside a hood made from an oil-stained blanket. The second agent came back and passed a sack to the driver and Brill watched them eat. Watched as the worker bees, the junior executives and white-shirted agents came back to the building, bellies full and hearts ready to defend life, liberty and the American way. He didn't see the driver's head nod. Only noticed it after it happened. The doldrums, that slow time an hour after lunch, when the body was shunting energy to the digestive system. The car was warm, the action slow. Their attention waned. It was time to make a move. Chapter 17. They didn't pay attention to him walking. No one did. The few people on the sidewalk gave him wide berth, avoiding him. He lurched and limped to the corner of the parking deck and gave it a glance. The guard shack at the bottom of the shallow dip was manned. Even though the man inside was preoccupied with his phone, it was too much to risk. Brill kept going. The back of the building had a concrete barrier around a set of large blue dumpsters and some of the air conditioning units for the parking deck. Air blowers and moisture condensation machines and other things he knew nothing about. A building was like a living thing. It needed to breathe to keep the people inside alive and happy and productive at keeping the world safe. The large door to the maintenance area was vertical bars, painted industrial brown. They were hinged on each side and parted in the middle, pump arms designed to draw them back and flat against the 15-foot concrete walls. There was a black door at the far end of the blocked-off area, access for the janitors and cleaners to move trash to the big dumpsters. Brill wondered if he could go over the wall. Security cameras covered the front of the building and the entrance to the parking garage. He could see another on the corner aimed back and a small fisheye wall mount above the janitor's door. Over wasn't out of the options list, but he would need better cover. Nature provided it. He heard the rumble of thunder and glanced up the long narrow street. Clouds marched across the horizon, wind shifting and changing the gray-black shapes. A wall of rain came with them. He wandered behind the building, stopped at the corner where the two walls met to form a V-shape and pretended to relieve himself. Just to see if it attracted attention. No one came out to yell. No one rounded the corner to tell him to move on. He finished the mime and kept moving around the building, walking the block, watching out of the corner of his eyes. The two guys were still in the car, still watching. The rest of the street was busy with average afternoon traffic. Nothing stuck out to him, nothing attracted his attention. It felt safe. Safe enough, he smirked. He was about to break into a government building full of important people. There were Secret Service inside, he knew. Most senators had a security unit assigned to them and Shelby was no exception. He wondered if he would have to kill them too. They knew the price, he said to himself. He had been a soldier once, and a mercenary. Both times he had been paid for fighting. The bodyguards and security were no exception. They weren't freedom fighters in it for a good cause. They were men and women paid to do a job. Which made them mercenaries as well. The rain chased him up the sidewalk as he rounded the corner again. It turned his clothes into a stinking mess, and he almost dropped them on the wall outside of the dumpster bay. That's why the homeless shed them, he thought. The rain fell in hard, stinging drops, an afternoon downpour that was common in coastal areas. It made long-distance surveillance difficult, if almost impossible, and also hid him from the cameras. The electronic eyes had trouble distinguishing the movement, his among the raindrops. Brill lost the limp and hustled to the corner where he pretended to pee. He scrambled up, using pressure from his arms and feet pressed against the corners, and dropped to the other side. He ducked behind the dumpster as the rain fell, and waited. Chapter 18. The door opened 3 hours later. The time caused Brill. He squatted in the rain beside the dumpster, soaked and cold. Hyperthermia set in, a mild stage, but for a man used to the heat of the jungle, it was enough to slow him down. Almost too slow. The janitor kicked the door open with a curse and shoved a plastic rolling cart full of bags stuffed with shredded paper into the rain. Brill caught the edge of the door on his shoulder and backed into the wall. If the man had been paying attention, he would have been caught. But luck was on his side. The janitor kept his head ducked under a rain poncho and cursed every single bag he tossed through the open door of the dumpster. Brill snuck around him, stepped inside and hoped the man wouldn't notice the puddles he left on the floor. The short hallway led off in two directions and Brill chose the left-hand side because he could see a stairwell. He stripped as he climbed 2 flights, peeling off the clothing layer by layer. He wasn't any drier underneath, but the shell of fabric leaving his body in the activity of motion warmed his core as he climbed. Brill kept the clothes. He didn't want to leave a trail of breadcrumbs for anyone to follow. He wadded them up and carried them under his arm and hoped anyone who decided to take the stairs today would think it was an errant umbrella brought in from outside. By the time he made the rooftop access, he was warm under his sticky damp clothes. He checked the landing by the door for security cameras and was only mildly surprised there weren't any. If any enemy decided to make an incursion for high-level senators by airplane or helicopter, the building would be well warned ahead of time. They didn't need the early warning from a rooftop alarm. He settled on the landing to wait. Waiting was one of his areas of specialty. Chapter 19. He counted the minutes in his head as he listened to the building. It had a life of its own, breathing as people opened doors below, moving up and down the stairs when they had 1 or 2 flights. Not more though. He counted. He could smell the faint hint of cigarette smoke as someone sneaked their habit inside the stairwell. Then a slowdown for the afternoon. No one came all the way to the roof. There was no reason, he guessed. All of the guts were working. The pipes were piping water, the air conditioners blowing cool air into the floors below. Brill sat and waited. The noise picked up around 5, a rush of bodies pouring through the doors, clanging on the stairs, clomping to reach the parking garage. He could feel an increased hum in the walls, like the elevators were working overtime to deliver people to their rides home. It lasted for 15 minutes, a great rush of bodies exiting the concrete structure. Then silence descended, a tomb-like stillness that created a hollow echo of its very own. The absence of people. It was what he waited on. He wondered for a moment if the 2 men were still in the car on the street and bet they were. They would have perked up to watch the workers exit, alert for anyone moving against the crowd, senses keyed in on anything out of the ordinary. When it passed, they would slump back in their seats, maybe call in an order for food, or one could step outside and watch the exterior while the other went to grab it. Brill stood and stretched, tensing and stretching muscles grown tight from lack of movement, like some great cat preparing to hunt. His black eyes studied the stairs as they disappeared below. The senator would have a guard, he thought. Perhaps two on the exterior of his office. He didn't know the layout, so he would have to move fast. Brill descended 8 flights to the stairwell door and paused to listen and trace the blueprint in his mind. Shelby was in the office at the far end of a narrow hallway. It opened into a lobby where his secretary worked, with a small conference room to one side, and the senator's office through a wooden door on the back. His guards would be in the conference room, and the secretary should be gone. He hoped she wasn't working late. He could move fast down the hall, past the elevators and take the exterior door fast. The guards would be surprised, just for a moment, before their training kicked in. Then weapons would be drawn, shots might be fired. He had to be faster than their surprise. A concussion grenade worked best in situations like this, but absent that, he needed something else to distract them. He reached into the oversized pocket of his bulky coat and pulled out a can of soda. It had been hard not to drink it while waiting, harder still to not take a sip now. He began shaking it as he opened the door and peeked into the hall. It was empty. The shaking grew faster as he marched down the hall and gripped the doorknob. If it was locked, he would retreat to the stairwell and regroup, rethink. But it twisted under his grip. He gave one last hope the two guards weren't standing on the other side, weapons aimed, and slammed the door open with his shoulder. It was set up like he expected. The secretary's empty desk on his left, a glass-walled conference room on his right. There were 3 bodies in the room. They scrambled up as he burst through the door, 2 hands going for the holsters under their shoulders. Brill popped the top to the soda can and tossed it in a spinning arc that sprayed foamy brown liquid across their faces as he ran in. Human nature is to duck. They couldn't fight it. Sticky stinging soda splashed across them as they turned. Brill hit the first and crashed into the other. 1 hit for each, 1 hit designed to incapacitate, to cut off the circuit breaker in the brain for a few moments. Both fell and he kept moving to the third. His feet faltered, stuttered and stopped. Glory stood at the end of the table, arm raised to stop a blow from him. The senator's door opened and a man stepped out, pistol raised through the glass. He moved with quick sure steps to the open door. Brill turned back and Glory had her weapon drawn, aimed at him, finger white on the trigger. "Shall we talk?" she asked. Brill raised his hands and stepped back. He didn't have much choice. Chapter 20. MI6, Shelby smiled from the other side of a vast expansive desk that sat under a wall of windows. "How do you think we found you?" Brill sat on the sofa, hands and feet bound in thick plastic zip ties. The other man in the room was a mystery. He had yet to speak, just held a gun aimed at Brill's face. Glory sat in chair on the other side of the room and watched him not speak. The man in the corner watched him like a tiger studying prey. He had big white eyes that glowed against cappuccino skin, dark pupils drilling into his subjects. Brill imagined a lot of people were intimidated by those eyes. Or by the 6'6" frame, packed with muscles visible under the tailored suit. He looked poised and confident and impossible to forget, a man who made an impression. The complete opposite of Brill Wingfield. "You should just let me shoot him." His voice was cultured with a South African accent, softened by time in America. "It will save you a lot of trouble." Brill tilted his head and studied the man. Did he know him? Had they worked together in the SA military? Or gone up against each other in his time with Simon's Executive Options Group? Glory moved to the head of the table and crossed her arms across a chest he couldn't help but remember. "It would be a waste of time and resources if you got rid of him now." Her surfer accent was gone, replaced with an all-business British stiff upper lip. The easy laid-back manner he had known was gone as well. It was hard for her to look laid back with a big automatic strapped under her arm. Shelby drummed his fingers on the table. "I'm torn, son," he said. The tone of his voice didn't sound torn to Brill. He sounded like a preacher getting ready to go on a tear. "On the one hand, you were coming up here to kill me." He lifted the drumming fingers off the table and waved the hand back and forth in a seesaw motion. "On the other hand, you almost made it." He glanced at the tall black man. "You think you can train him better than that?" Brill felt dissected under the glowing dark eyes. "There is talent, yes. We knew he had this. But there is no discipline. Kind of folks we set him against, that could be an asset," Shelby countered. Brill raised his chin, curious. "That's bait he liked," Glory chirped. "I didn't say I liked it. You always made that move when you wanted to have sex," she said. Brill tucked his chin to his chest. He didn't have an answer for that. Maybe he did have a tell. "You said 6 weeks," Shelby reminded Carver. "I did. What can you do in 4? What did you have in mind?" Chapter 21. They were coming for him. He could feel it in the air. Maybe it was the vibrations from the movements of their bodies through the trees. Maybe it was something more chemical, a scent put out by a hunter on the prowl. There was no way to know how many of them there were. The last time it had been 6. A squad. Tight-knit. Highly trained. Highly skilled. He dispatched them with a simple efficiency, if not quite ease. Simon had hired the best special operators in the business, and Brill had been an apt pupil under their watchful ministrations. That, combined with his plain face and simple manner, made everyone underestimate him. "Always. And luck," he whispered as the edge of the column stalked into view. He had always been lucky in the way of the warrior. Like the universe had something to make up for, some great cosmic imbalance that nature kept trying to make right. He barely breathed as he counted the bodies in woodland camo. He could see 3, moving in a professional shuffle step, MP5s raised to shoulder. The magazines were packed with rubber bullets and hurt like hell when they hit. He knew because Carver shot him in the chest on the first day after his capture. And again the second, and the third. "Don't shoot me again," Brill warned as he lay on the ground and rubbed his battered chest. At least, that's what he meant to say. It might have come out as a groan. Carver caught the look in his eyes though. Black dark circles that looked more at home over a shark's smile than a man's. "The guards have live ammunition," the large man answered in a cultured Dutch accent. "Don't go beyond the fence." Brill wasn't concerned about the guards. If he decided to go again, and that time would come, there were gaps in their patrol he would exploit. Or kill them all, he muttered under his breath. Let Shelby Johnson make of that what he would. Brill could hop another train and this time skip the hunt down and kill the senator plan. The line of soldiers hunting him moved past, but something in the air tweaked the hair on his neck. He remained frozen in place. Watching. Waiting. A second group moved at a slight angle from the first. A redundant line designed to spot and capture him if he tried to make a move on the first group. Smart. Carver was learning how he operated. The man must take good notes, he thought, and held his breath as a member of the second group moved within 3 feet of him. The soldier scanned the area, gun trained on the pine-covered landscape. He paused next to the storm-canted tree trunk Brill hid under and tilted his head. Brill watched the young man's eyes scan the area again, searching for whatever it was that had given him pause. A line that looked unnatural, or a shift in the pine needles on the ground. Maybe a scuff mark in the dirt, or a broken branch. Whatever it was, the kid had a gift, because Brill had been very careful in building his hidey hole. "Tango!" The boy screamed and whipped his weapon toward the tree trunk. He squeezed off a shot as Brill rolled out from the other side and yanked a buried vine with him. The cord came up behind the soldier and caught him on his Achilles. The soldier stumbled backwards as he fought for balance, his trigger finger flinching out 2 wild shots before Brill slammed into him, and spun the weapon out of his hand. "Tango!" The boy screamed before the strap of his rifle cut off the wind. Brill smashed an elbow into his face and heard the crunch of bone as his nose exploded under the blow. He dropped with the unconscious body and aimed the rubber bullets at the others in the line. The weapon wasn't silenced as he squeezed off 6 shots at the 3 he could see, then he was up and running. He put the tree between him and the first line as they ran back to the ambush site, but he could hear the crack of their rifles in 3-round bursts and the buzzing chitter of bullets slamming into the ground, chasing him. He ducked low to minimize his profile and kept running. The ground churned around him as he reached a 12-foot fence. It would have taken a leap and a pull to flip up and over the chain link, but the razor wire and electrical charge at the top convinced him not to try. Again. He hauled left and sprinted. The trees opened up into a small clearing carved at the edge of the forest. Carver sat in the passenger seat holding a squatty wide-mouthed shotgun. Brill pulled up short as he stepped into the clearing. Moments later, the platoon hunting him fanned out from between the trees, guns held ready. "Should have turned right," Carver said. He aimed the shotgun at Brill and pulled the trigger. A beanbag slammed into his gut and hurled him back 3 feet. He rolled on his side and clutched the spreading ache as he struggled to catch his stolen breath. He didn't hear Carver march over to him and lean down. "I assumed you meant rubber bullets," he informed the fallen man. "Speak up, if otherwise." Brill opened his mouth, but he couldn't form words. Hard to speak when he couldn't breath. "Excellent," Carver grinned, white teeth glowing against his dark skin. Again. He motioned 2 of the soldiers to break from the crescent semicircle and pick up Brill. They half-dragged, half-carried him up the overgrown forest path in the wake of the jeep. He tried to get his feet under him, but his bruised and battered torso begged for just a little more time before it could function properly. Pain was a mind killer, he told himself, modified from one of his favorite books. He worked to master the pain, worked to shut it down and focus on getting his wind and his legs back again. Focused on finding an edge. They weren't going to kill him. Not on purpose, he thought. Which meant they had other plans. Chapter 22. Bring him to me. He's not ready. The president's wavy hair was starting to gray. A gift of the office, Shelby thought. He wished he had that problem. Where the leader of the free world's hair had decided to turn gray, his had decided to turn loose. Still, things could be worse. The man on the other end of the phone was privy to secrets held by very few. Just as the senator talking to him had a few of his own. You said 4 weeks, the gravely southern drawl reminded him. That's what I was told. The silence stretched between them as each waited for the other to fill the void. Is there a complication? The president broke first. Shelby gave a wry half-smile to the receiver he held in his hand. They were, after all, a couple of good old boys from a small state made good, and the most powerful man in the world didn't need to be reminded who put him in that spot. Not a complication, the senator said. I've got a schedule, the president reminded him. Meaning he didn't have time to dicker. One of the things Shelby liked about him. Direct and to the point on conversations that mattered. That boy's got a wild streak. He heard the president laugh. He's from home, isn't he? Shelby joined him for a moment. We can't predict his actions, said Shelby. We can't control him. Set it up, said the president. Same rules of engagement as last time. Shelby nodded into the phone. You have an opening in that schedule, Mr. President? The chuckle came again. Set it up, the voice on the other end of the phone answered. Shelby listened as the man hung up and waited a few minutes before dialing another number. Carver, he said. You've got your first assignment. Chapter 23. The room looked the same. Long table set on the far side, covered in a white tablecloth. A picnic basket sat in the center. There were 3 Secret Service agents in the room, 2 armed with pistols, the other behind him next to the door he'd just entered. As he stepped forward, red dots bounced across his chest from the pistols. They weren't taking any chances. He walked toward the 2 men at the table. Shelby Johnson sat with a satisfied smile on his face and motioned Brill to the empty chair opposite of him. The other man was the president. He smiled and warmth rolled off of him. It was part of his gift, part of why any person who met him fell in love. Charm, maybe. Brill had thought about the affect often. It was more than that, it was an ability to make anyone feel like they were the most important person in the room at that moment. You look like you've had a rough time, the president said. He leaned up from the chair and reached for a sweating pitcher of brown liquid. I had Melva make us up some favorites, he said as he drizzled the liquid into a glass and pushed it across the table toward Brill. Sweet tea. Brill took the glass and swallowed half down in 3 gulps. It was ambrosia, not too sweet, just a hint of bitterness. Can you believe I have her put the sun tea jars out in the rose garden? The president laughed as he took a sip of his own. How is your training? Rough. The president nodded. Necessary, said Shelby. Brill glanced at the senator. What am I being trained to do? He asked. Besides survive. The 2 men across from him exchanged glances. Why? Brill asked. Why what? Why there? Brill asked as he studied the 2 men. Why is it so important? Shelby shot a look at the president and waited. There were bags under the other man's eyes, a sense of exhaustion that gave him a sleepy look. Brill thought they looked new. Heavy as the head, he thought. You know how many wars we've fought over oil? The president rasped after a moment. Shelby held up his fingers and showed Brill a 0. We've secured allies, funded their programs and made concessions, the senator said. But we don't engage in direct conflict. But oil makes the world spin round, Shelby continued. We're hungry for it, and our appetite is growing every year. So the CIA and the State Department look for ways to feed us from the outside, and we've got Interior looking inside to shore up our reserves. He pointed to the president. But that man, he grinned. That mind of his, doesn't think about just today. Hell, I've been after him to start planning his re-election and succession, but he's got an eye on something else. Lithium, said the president. China is starting to grow and we can't compete with them for oil. They have twice our land mass, and we're outnumbered 3-1. In 20 years, their economy will rival the US and in 30, we're eclipsed. Your help with the minister in South Africa secured 2 of the world's largest lithium mines. What is it? Batteries, said the president. A lot goes into alternative energy, but our DoD boys think we need it and I agree with them. Let the Chinese drill for oil. We'll use the sun and wind and water. And oil, Shelby corrected. The problem we keep running up against in a 30-year plan is the president is only in charge of it for 8. Brill tilted his head and gave Shelby a calculating look. The senator smiled back. No term limits, said Brill. And there won't be, Shelby nodded. Not while I'm alive. I don't see where I fit. You think it's just this one plan? We're disrupting industries, we're fighting foreign governments, hell, there's a new world order out there gunning to knock all our hard work to hell every damn day. I'm just a soldier, Brill said. No. He looked at the president. The man stood and reached across the table to pour more sweet iced tea from a sweating pitcher. Brill noted the Secret Service agents shift, hands closer to their weapons than they were a moment before. Ready, in case he moved. Your grandfather was a carpenter, right? The president sat back down. Brill waited for him to settle back before he reached for his glass and nodded. Smart man, the president said. Bought 10 houses when the arsenal moved in and moved them out to his land in the country so he could rent them and fund his retirement. Brill shifted his eyes from the president to the senator and back. He was planning for the future. The 2 men across from him nodded. He worked for a group of other men who ran your city, said the president. Did you know that? Brill did. The Nixons. He was what they referred to as their go-to guy, said Shelby. They had their fingers in a lot of pies, but if they needed woodwork done, plumbing, mechanical, hell, you name it and they called your pawpaw. He seemed like a man you could admire. I did, said Brill. I didn't know him, the president answered. But he feels like the kind of man I would have admired as well. That's a good turn of phrase, said Shelby. A go-to man. The guy you go to when you want to get stuff done. His eyes drilled into Brill, studied him. Is that your offer? Offer? Shelby scoffed. Son, we've been grooming you for this for years. Rebels, Brill growled, but the president held up a hand to forestall him. That was unfortunate, he agreed. A tragedy and you got your revenge for it. But we've been watching you every moment since. Shelby leaned forward. More than watching. Planning. Nudging. Building. Building what? Our go-to guy. Brill crinkled his eyebrows and took another sip of tea to cover it. His eyes darted across the room, taking in the agents at the door and far wall, the 2 men across from him. You built me? He finally asked. It's a strong word, said the president. You can call it training if you like, the senator said. But you had the grit we wanted to start with, the president added. You're a killer, Shelby said. When's the last time you lost a night of sleep over killing someone? I'm a soldier, Brill started to argue. You were a soldier, the senator continued. Now, you're something more. But what? Brill wondered as he stared at the 2 men watching him. What exactly was he? Chapter 24. The car drove him to a diner. It looked old-fashioned and out of place among the towering skyscrapers, like someone had dropped it in the middle of the block and the buildings grew up around it. He could see Carver through one of the plate glass windows, sitting at a table furthest from the entrance. The driver didn't say anything as he pulled to the curb. Brill stepped out and the car drove off. The crowd bustled on the sidewalk, washing past him like a human river. He could disappear into it, he knew. By the time Carver made it outside, he could be around a corner and gone. If anyone was watching, they would have to shoot into the crowd to get him, so he felt safe. Relatively safe. And curious. A bell over the door tinged when he stepped through. A tired-looking waitress with limp hair and smudged lipstick gave him a wan smile. Her name tag said she was Alice. He nodded toward Carver and stepped past her to join the man at the booth. Carver had his back to the wall, a clear sightline to the door. The opposite seat offered zero protection. He couldn't put his back to a wall because it was window, and sitting straight on exposed him to the door and the rest of the patrons. Sitting side-on in the other direction kept him open to the kitchen and the 2 shadows he could see through the pass-through. He took a deep breath. This part was about trust. How much did he trust the man across from him not to have him killed? Brill slid into the seat and browsed the menu. You look like a man without a care in the world, Carver smiled. White teeth glowed against his dark skin and his cultured accent was melodious. Hungry, said Brill. Try the omelet. Alice came over and he ordered coffee and an omelet. You won't be disappointed, said Carver. He slipped a piece of paper on the vinyl tabletop and trapped it under long fingers. You know, he said. I have long admired places like this in America. The concept of breakfast where I grew up was anything that might be left over from the previous night. I've had beans and rice for breakfast, said Brill. Grubs. Snakes. Carver grinned harder. Often there was nothing from the night before either. You didn't go for bushmeat? The tall black man pulled a disgusted face as Alice returned with 2 plates and a coffee for Brill. It does not have quite the same appeal as bacon. Carver carved off a piece of his omelette with his fork. Not much does. They ate in satisfied silence for a few moments. Brill reached the last 2 bites and Carver slid the piece of paper across the table. He picked it up and slipped it into his pocket, but not before spying a single male name scrawled in an elegant loop. "What did they do?" he asked in a low voice. "Does it matter?" Brill considered the question as he moved the plate to the end of the table and concentrated on his coffee. "I like killing bad guys." Carver scooted his platter to the edge and sat back. "I do not know if we have the option to choose." Brill shrugged. "You think there is always a choice?" Brill didn't answer, just sipped the black coffee. Alice came back with a refill for the both of them. "Let's just say," he waited for her to leave. "If I had a choice." Carver nodded and grinned, like that was the answer he was waiting to hear. "Good," he said and dropped a crisp green $20 bill on the table. "This meal is on me. Your fist assignment. Find that man and keep him safe." Brill watched the large black man leave the diner. As he passed through the door, 2 more plain-looking patrons joined him and fell in line behind. He waited for them to disappear behind around the corner, and pulled the paper from his pocket. He read the name. "Another cup, hon?" Alice leaned over with the half-full pot of black ambrosia. "Done for now." Brill got up. "I've got work to do." More work by the author. The next adventure continues in Operative.